In need of references for your research? Do you want a digital library that you can access for free anytime and anywhere? You don't have to look far. SERPI is here for you. SERPI is an online database of socioeconomic materials produced by the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, government agencies, research and academic institutions, and international organizations based in the Philippines. It is the country's first online repository of socioeconomic information, created for policymakers and development practitioners, researchers, educators, and students. To access SERPI, just visit the PIDS website and click the SERPI widget under the Databases tab, or type serp-p.pids.gov.ph. SERPI has a wide variety of materials such as journal articles, books, research papers, working papers, policy notes, audiovisual materials, and more. As of 2022, SERPI has more than 60 partner institutions contributing knowledge resources to the database. SERPI provides a comprehensive coverage of references encompassing 22 research themes: labor and education, gender and development, poverty, technology and innovation, trade and industry, and many more. On the enhanced website of SERPI, you can filter your research by keyword or author, publication type, research theme, or year published, all at the same time. SERPI has more than 7,000 publications and audiovisual materials that you can access and download for free. What are you waiting for? Visit SERPI now. Socioeconomic Research Portal for the Philippines, innovating knowledge exchange and policy research.
So what is PIDS? For over 40 years, the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, or PIDS, has been the country's foremost socioeconomic think tank. It conducts rigorous and objective policy research and analyses that help the government in crafting relevant policies, plans, and programs in support of the country's long-term vision and development goals. PIDS pursues its mandate through three basic programs: research, dissemination, and outreach. Through its research program, PIDS identifies and prioritizes studies, develops proposals, and conducts research on priority areas. The results of these studies are then disseminated through different platforms, publications, online resources, PIDS Corner, seminars, and the Development Policy Research Month, or DPRM, held every September. To shed light on key policy issues, the advice and expertise of the Institute's research fellows are also sought by policymakers, government agencies, private sector, and civil society. Since 1977, PIDS has completed numerous policy studies on a wide range of development topics. This brand of service has then translated to policies and programs that have improved the lives of every Filipino. Philippine Institute for Development Studies, service through policy research.
And we are proud to say that SERPI is the country's first online repository of socioeconomic information. And currently, SERPI network has more than 60 partner institutions, mostly from the government and academe, bonded by a shared passion for research, knowledge, and exchange.
The function of PIDS is to disseminate our research to as many as possible as public. That's our commitment. That's why all our researches are on the website and shared. Our job is to inform the public, and we don't even want to do a research we cannot publish and share, because that's the nature of our institution.
In ADB, we conduct a variety of communication research because we make sure that the inputs of our stakeholders, particularly the potentially affected communities, are taken into consideration so that we are able to customize the projects according to their needs, their preferences, and we'd also like to get broad community support. Naglabas kayo ng isang magandang research and then na-publish siya online. Dapat maging prepared din kayo dun sa possibility na baka tawagan kayo kung pwede to clarify something, pwedeng ma-interview yun. Usually, nangyayari yun kapag sa mga survey stories. Minsan kasi masyadong technical yung language ng survey, so meron kaming mga i-clarify. So, pinapa-interview namin sa Anchor live sa show, yung nag-create ng survey na yun para maliwanagan kami. Ano bang ibig sabihin ng pagtaas o yung pagbaba? Mas gusto po ng media yung simple, yung diretso. Wag po natin gawing komplikado yung mga bagay na pwede nating padaliin.
With AI, the hope is that AI is able to help us prepare data. We have structured data to train dealing with unstructured data. And if that is successful, you can just imagine the tremendous amount of information that can be gobbled up by AI. So it makes research powerful that way.
Thank you for joining us in that effort of widely disseminating knowledge, and that's produced by our institutions, which is disseminate as fast as possible everything that we produce so that there will be an exchange of information and knowledge.
Good morning, everyone. Magandang umaga sa ating lahat. Welcome to the Socioeconomic Research Portal for the Philippines Network Annual Symposium and Meeting with the theme Research in Action, Transforming Research Dissemination in the Digital Age. I am Ezekiel Nicomedes. My friends call me Zeke and my colleagues call me Zeki. a PIDS Senior Research Specialist and the SERPI Coordinator, and I will be your host for this morning. This forum morning session was made possible with the help of our SERPI network members. And for your context, SERPI is an initiative of the Philippine Institute for Development Studies. It was established 24 years ago as the country's first online repository of socioeconomic studies. It serves as a bridge between the government and the research institutions, promoting open access to knowledge and fostering collaboration. Today, the SERPI network comprises 68 partner institutions, primarily from the government and academe, united by a shared commitment to research, knowledge sharing, and collaboration. This morning sessions will delve into the latest and most relevant topics that can significantly impact both your organization and the SERPI network. This afternoon, we will focus on strengthening our information dissemination efforts, reviewing current challenges and developments, and charting the future direction of SERPI with our valued partners. Before we begin, I encourage our participants to engage in today's discussion actively. For our on-site participants, you can ask questions later during our open forum. And for our online participants, live on Facebook via PIDS and SERPI Facebook pages, just comment down in the comment section. Without further ado, to give a message of support and welcoming remarks, let us welcome the PIDS President, Dr. Aniceto C. Orbeta Jr.
Good morning to all of you, our esteemed partners in the Socioeconomic Research Portal for the Philippines Network. I am pleased to open the 2024 SERPI Network Annual Symposium and Meeting officially. I also warmly greet those online viewers on the PIDS and SERPI Facebook pages. Although I cannot be with you in person today, I am pleased that this important gathering brings together familiar faces and new colleagues, fostering connection that further strengthen our collective mission. This year's theme, Research in Action, Transforming Research Dissemination in the Digital Age, reflects the evolving landscape of knowledge sharing and the crucial role that digital tools and platforms play in improving the accessibility and relevance of socioeconomic research. In today's fast-paced, information-driven world, it is insufficient to merely produce studies. We must ensure that the knowledge we generate reaches those who can benefit from it the most and catalyzes tangible, possible change in their lives. This theme resonates deeply with our SERPI partner organization as we knowledge creators and advocates for making this understandable, relatable, and actionable. PIDS has consistently been committed to advancing research information dissemination and utilization. Over the past year, we have intensified our efforts in digital sphere by leveraging platforms such as social media, webinars, and other online tools to engage with a broader and more diverse audience. This endeavor goes beyond fulfilling our respective institutional mandates. It is about ensuring that the knowledge we produce has a meaningful impact on people's daily lives, leading to evidence-based policy crafting and informed decision-making, governance, and program implementation. Addressing social challenges begins with access to the right information, and SERPI provides loads of information from nearly 10,000 archive publications that tackle pressing development issues. By making this wealth of information readily accessible, we empower citizens to make informed choices, fostering societal progress. At SERPI, we take pride in championing open access to research essential for shaping public policy and improving governance in the Philippines. We thoughtfully designed this morning's symposium to equip us with innovative strategies to amplify our dissemination efforts. It will feature distinguished speakers offering fresh perspectives and practical insights into using digital innovations to make research more engaging and impactful. Ms. Gabi Baisas, a digital forensic researcher at Rappler, will discuss how progressive media organizations use data storytelling to transform complex research into relatable and engaging content for the public. Meanwhile, Ms. Ingrid Espinosa, a consultant for science communication and a lecturer at the Ateneo de Manila University, will address the importance of simplifying complex topics to enhance the accessibility and impact of research. Finally, Mr. Luigi Conti, head of the Communications and Advocacy Divisions of EDCOM 2, will explore strategies to optimize the use of digital platforms for research dissemination, providing practical insights on reaching diverse audiences from policymakers to the general public and fostering stronger connections through tailored communication strategies. For the afternoon session, we will conduct a collaborative workshop designed to explore and shape the future of research dissemination for SERPI and your respective organizations. Building on our achievements in 2024 and previous years and insights from this morning's discussion, we will collectively brainstorm innovative ideas, best practices, and applicable strategies to ensure our knowledge sharing and audience engagement. This session underscores our shared commitment to collaborate, innovate, and create lasting impacts through effective research dissemination. I take pride in what SERPI has accomplished in the last 24 years. PIDS owes SERPI's success to all of you, our partners, because without your continued support, we would not have been able to sustain and expand the network. Thanks to your efforts, what began as an online database has evolved into a network of institutions united by a shared passion for knowledge generation and exchange. Before I conclude, I would like to thank everyone who contributed to making this event possible. To our SERPI team, led by Dr. Sunny Domingo and Mr. Ezekiel Nicomedes, thank you for your unwavering dedication and hard work. To our network members, thank you for your continued support and contribution, which has been instrumental to SERPI's success. Together, we have established a platform that is more than just a repository of knowledge. It is a dynamic community united by a commitment to open access. Thank you very much for your presence today. I wish us all a productive day and many more years of fruitful partnership in SERPI. I now turn the floor back over to our MC, Seki.
Thank you, Dr. Arbeta, for setting the mood of today's event. Now, before we proceed with the presentation, we would like to acknowledge the organizations, the SERPI network members who made this everything possible. I would like to call each organization. Kung nandito po kayo, may invite you to stand. From the Agricultural Credit Policy Council, please. Anyone? From the Ateneo School of Government. Okay. A gentle clap naman po for them. From Bureau of Customs. From Central Philippine University, from Iloilo City, from CPBRD, Congressional Policy and Budget Research Department, and from the Development Academy of the Philippines, thank you, sir, from DLSU Social Development Research Center, from Dole Institute for Labor Studies, and from DOST PICAARD. Pasensya na, hindi ko na maisa-isa, masyadong mahabang ating pangalan. From Mindanao Development Authority and Mariano Marcos State Universities. And also, we would like to acknowledge different NEDA regional offices. For the context of everyone, every regional offices ay member ng SERPI. From NEDA 9, everyone? from NEDA Region 12. Okay. Hi, Miss Myra. And from NEDA Region 3, Central Luzon. Okay. And from NEDA Region 4B or Mimaropa. Okay, wala pa. And from NEDA Region 8, ayun. And from NEDA CAR Region, Cordillera Administrative Region. Ayan si Sir Joseph. And also from the National Tax Research Center, Miss Rhea, and thank you. From the Philippine Statistics Authority, from the Polytechnic University of the Philippines, from PUP, and from Public-Private Partnership Center, and colleagues from Simio Inotech, Sir Jello and his colleagues, and from Siarca, Miss Mina and Sir Nelson, okay, and from University of Batangas, hi sir, and from UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies, Sir Joseph, and from the National Center for Transportation Studies, and from UPLB Center for Strategic Planning and Policy Studies, Miss Maren, ayun, and Miss Danica. And lastly, from the University of San Carlos, Sir Julius. Okay, thank you everyone for attending this event. Now let's proceed to our first presenter. Her presentation is titled, Telling Stories with Data, Insights from Rappler. Our first presenter will share how media organizations like Rappler use data storytelling to turn complex research into relatable and engaging content for the public. Her session will show data, when presented effectively, can inform and inspire meaningful conversations on critical issues. We are fortunate to have with us today Ms. Gabby Baizas, who is a digital forensics researcher at Rappler. She has 5 years of experience writing stories about social media, online culture, and propaganda and disinformation. She's also an alumna of the Ateneo de Manila University Communications Program. And thank you for joining. Let us all welcome, let's give a round of applause to Ms. Gabby Baizas.
Hello, thank you, Z. So I'm Gabby. I'm a digital forensics researcher at Rappler. So today I'll be showing you how kami sa Rappler and for media organizations, how we tell stories with data. Okay, so first I just want to start off with this question. So why tell stories with data? Ano ba yung value in telling stories with data? So just to keep things simple, numbers, figures, and statistics can, of course, complement any kind of story that you're working on. Siyempre kami as journalists, we don't discount now words, interviews, anecdotes, desk research can really tell like a compelling story in itself. But there are certain issues, certain topics, certain themes where you will really benefit from using all kinds of data to show the scale, the gravity, the impact of certain issues that words cannot necessarily do. So that's the why of why we tell stories with data. So siguro the next question is, how do you tell stories with data? So what I want to tell you for this presentation is it's not as complicated as you think. I want to give three concrete takeaways on how you can tell stories with data. This is what I've learned from my experience in journalism. But I think that any researcher, any communicator, any kind of worker naman from any industry can apply these tips also into the way that they communicate with data. So the first tip that I want to leave for this presentation is you have to figure out what kind of story you want to tell. So from a journalist perspective kasi, we also have to think about timely ba yung issue na to? Is it relevant? Is it newsworthy? But any person from any industry naman can think, what kind of topic do I want to discuss? What questions do I have? What answers am I looking for when I'm telling a certain story, writing a certain report, preparing a certain kind of presentation? So yun yung first step naman in telling stories with data. You have to figure out what it is exactly that you want to tell. What story you want to tell, what you want to talk about sa story mo. The second tip, you have to think about the kind of data that you need. So pag ganito kasi, like, in my experience as a data journalist, sobrang big deal kasi sa amin yung feasibility when it comes to a certain story, report, project, research paper. Kasi sometimes naman, like, we can dream big naman, pero kung wala ka talagang data on that certain issue, you don't have the exact kind of data you need, then you won't be able to pursue that kind of story anymore. You have to do your research, figure out what it is that you need to tell the story that you want to convey. So for instance, what kind of data do I need? Do I need, numbers of, kunwari, if we are writing during the pandemic, no, like numbers of COVID-19 cases, or kunwari, like, since ang dami nangyayari sa DepEd, ang dami nangyayari sa, with, public transportation, do I want to know how many students, on average, how many students are there per classroom? What's ano yung student-to-teacher ratio? Kunwari sa transportation, how many people ride the MRT every day? Parang ganon. You also have to think about yung sources for data. For example, you have government sources. I'll get into that later. Ang dami namang different kinds of data that you can get from different agencies. You can also get that from different research orgs. Or if you have the capability naman sa organization ninyo, you can also gather the data yourself. It depends on the kind of story that you want to tell. Again, going back to the first tip. So after you think about the data that you need, you have to make sure that your content is accessible and understandable to your audience. For me kasi parang feeling ko ito yung core kasi ng journalism. Ito yung core of, writing news, for the media. You have to make sure na yung complex issues, understandable naman talaga yan sa mga readers mo, to your audience, to the people that you want to communicate to. For me, my philosophy talaga as a writer has always been your writing is only as good as, how understandable it is, how accessible it is. Kasi pwede namang, if marami kang info, but you don't know how to communicate, you don't know how to speak the language of your audience, parang it doesn't have as much value anymore. Kasi you need to be able to communicate to your audience and tell them, ito yung meaning ng data. This is what the topic is about. This is the data that will show you, ganito kalala yung issue that we're talking about for this story, this project, this research paper. So right now, medyo abstract pa kasi yung mga tips ko for now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through an in-depth story that I worked on. I worked on this last year. Tapos I'll show you how I applied these 3 rules din sa story ko. So this was the topic of the story that I worked on last year. So I wanted to talk about yung Gen Z attitudes towards work and money and finance. Ako kasi this is very close to my heart because I'm a Gen Z. I also noticed din kasi na parang ang dami kasing discussions online and, in different circles na, parang iba talaga yung mga work ethics ng Gen Z. They have different views on, money, on life, on work-life balance, ganon. So I thought, I think that would be a good topic to discuss, in terms of data. Kasi for sure, yung my gut feeling was, itong shifts in work ethics, work habits, work values, it doesn't happen in a vacuum kasi for Gen Zs. For sure, may socio-economic factors that impacted them. So this is why I wanted to work on this story, this data story. And I thought it would be great to let you guys know ano yung process, yung thought process ko working on this story because this was the first socio-economic story that I worked on. So I hope that this will be very insightful for you also if you ever decide to pursue data storytelling in your own respective fields. So my first tip was figure out what kind of story you want to tell. Ako naman, madali naman yung part na to because this was, I was already very invested in this topic. I already had a lot of questions myself. So I knew what I wanted to talk about na. I knew what story I wanted to tell with the data. So these were some of the questions I wanted answered. So kunwari, what do Gen Z Filipinos think about the economy today? Do they think it's strong? Do they think it's weak? Nahihirapan ba sila to save money, to earn money? What do Gen Z Filipinos think about work and what do they look for in a job? Dati kasi, I guess it would be easier to say na, basta like fulfilling, I'm passionate about what I do. And ngayon kasi since it's much harder to earn a living, baka naman Gen Z Filipinos are prioritizing benefits, salary, more tangible benefits like that. And then of course, are Gen Z Filipinos earning and saving enough? So these are some of the sample questions I wanted answered. So at least, pag may questions na ako, I kind of knew what kind of data I needed to look for to answer those questions. So that's the first tip, and this is how I addressed it. So yung second tip ko naman, think about what data you need. And I really enjoyed working on this story kasi I had so many different data sources to work on, to work with. So at first, I knew I wanted in-depth interviews with case studies tsaka yung expert. So case studies, syempre I wanted to talk to real, Gen Z Filipinos na financially independent. I asked one of my friends, I asked the partner of my other friend, I wanted to get case studies of real Gen Z workers who can share their personal experiences, earning a living and, saving, how, what their lifestyle is like. I made sure na, since dalawa yung case studies ko, I made sure na magkaiba sila ng backgrounds. What I did was, one of the case studies, she was based in Manila, remote yung job niya with an international employer. She works in creatives. The other case study naman, based siya sa province. He's a healthcare worker. He lives with his family naman, pero siya yung breadwinner. So very different, case studies, and they got to share their stories with me in depth. And of course, since hindi ko naman expertise ang socioeconomic issues, I also made sure to have an in-depth interview also with an expert. So I contacted Sir Sunny Africa from Ibon Foundation. He could give me more context on the Philippine economy, labor rights of Filipinos. So it was really easy for me to make sense of the issue because I had an expert who could help me contextualize ano yung issues with the Philippine economy now today. So I had those in-depth interviews. Next, I also used survey data. Kami sa Rappler, I'm not sure if you're familiar. If you visit our website, sa lower right corner, we run some surveys from time to time. So I crafted a questionnaire with the help of our data scientists, data analysts, just asking Gen Z Filipinos like what they felt about the economy, work values, savings, the relationship with money, what they look for in a job. And we ran that on the website for, I think, 2 weeks, ganun. And then we were able to collect the data. And then our data analysts also at Rappler, they helped us make sense of the data. Parang they crunched it so that they could provide more quantitative insights talaga from the survey to let us know this is what Gen Z Filipinos think about these issues. Apart from that, I also used government and BSP data. So I'll get into this later, but I did use government data from a lot of different sources. And syempre, I did additional desk research on press releases, NGOs, baka naman may existing studies that already talked about this topic. Para naman may context din ako with what's already been done, what questions have been answered, what questions haven't been answered yet. So this is what I did for the second step, for the second tip. My third tip, before I get to the third tip, I'll show you where I got the data exactly. So this is the website of yung Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. So I knew I wanted to get data on, syempre, inflation. Kasi that's a big factor as to why, Gen Z Filipinos feel this way about money, about work. And it's actually on their website. You can access a lot of different data on different government agencies and yung attached offices nila. Just check their website because chances are there's a lot of data that you can already work with na publicly available naman na. So this is the BSP website, and then they have different kinds of data that you can work with in terms of inflation, consumer price index. So this is what I used din sa story ko. If it's not publicly available sa website nila, you can also go to the government's Freedom of Information portal. Actually, in my experience naman, very responsive naman sila. Even if, kunwari, they don't have the data you're looking for, at least nagre-reply naman sila eh. And what you can do with the Freedom of Information portal is you can get in touch, you can submit a request to any government office, tsaka yung agencies, and then asking for the specific data points that you need. And they'll get in touch with you naman via email. And you can also see like the existing requests, kunwari yung mga dating successful requests, yung mga ibang unsuccessful requests for the Freedom of Information portal. So there's a lot of resources at our disposal. We just have to make sure that we know where to find this information. So ito naman yung third tip ko. So make sure that your content is understandable and accessible, syempre, to your audience. So how did I do that with my story? So syempre, since I'm using ang dami kong sources ng information, I have my interviews, I have my government data, I have my survey data. How do I make sense of it para understandable naman yung issue ko to our readers, to our audience? So first tip, syempre, don't overwhelm readers with statistics. Hindi naman lahat ng tao, they're not always adept with numbers. Syempre, ma-overwhelm kasi yung ibang tao with all the statistics if you give them too much information. So you have to make sure to cherry pick ano yung pinaka-important sa story mo. Ano yung pinaka-important for the report that you're working on. What pieces of information do you want to highlight sa report, sa research project, or whatever you're working on. And of course, if you're going to work with data, tapos may visualizations kayo, you have to make sure na reader-friendly yung charts ninyo. Syempre, visible yung text, okay naman yung color choices, things like that. Just make sure na it's very accessible to different kinds of readers and it's easy to understand. Na parang isang tingin na lang, like they already know what kind of story the chart is telling. And then next, syempre, you have to weave data into your story, into your report, into your research project so that everything flows nicely. I'll run you through the different kinds of things that I did sa data ko to make sure that my story made sense. So, kami sa Rappler, we use this website called Flourish. It's free. If kami kasi we like yung mga embeddable charts sa mga stories namin. Parang interactive din kasi yung charts. This is free. Anyone can sign up for Flourish. And they have several templates talaga with, for many different kinds of charts. So for example, may line charts sila, may bar graphs, pie graphs. They even have templates for maps, for different types of diagrams. So, marami talaga. So you can always explore these resources on your own. Kasi marami talagang ibang templates for whatever you need for your project. And then this is one of the sample charts that I did to show yung inflation rates for the past 10 years. So agad-agad, parang unang tingin pa lang, you can kind of already tell na tumataas talaga yung inflation over the years. And I used a line chart kasi continuous naman yung data for inflation for the past 10 years. And then you can already see naman through the line like where inflation spiked, parang when, and ano yung triggers then actually. So I'm not sure kung kita sa screens, pero since it's for the past 10 years, may annotations din ako to highlight which spikes happened under which administration. So may Aquino, Duterte, Marcos. And then on the right side of the chart, kita nyo may spike kasi in inflation following February 2022. This was after yung Russia invasion of Ukraine. Kasi after yung invasion, ang dami kasing spikes in gas, oil, etc. So you can see at least if you can identify na parang kunwari may certain spikes, tapos you know what triggered them, you can also annotate them para magigets agad ng reader, magigets agad ng audience mo. So at least ito, very clear that there are spikes in inflation naman talaga, and it's really harder for younger Filipinos to deal with the impacts of inflation. Ito naman, this is a sample chart I did with yung survey data namin from our website. So this is one of the questions that we asked. So ito yung sample question, I need several jobs or sources of income to keep afloat. Tapos yung mga respondents, they would answer from strongly agree to strongly disagree. Ito naman, it's a stacked bar chart kasi I divided them per income class. Actually, yung data ko for income class, I got them from PIDS din. based sa poverty thresholds. So that's how yun yung basis ko for the groupings, for the cohorts of income classes. Tapos so ito, may low income, middle income, upper income. Tapos syempre, since sensitive naman yung information, we also have an option na I'd rather not say, I'd rather not disclose yung income. Tsaka may overall din. And it's stacked to, these are stacked bar charts kasi we want to show yung percentages ng responses per income class. And it also helps din na ganito yung color scheme namin. So of course, syempre, pag strongly agree, green siya. Pag strongly disagree, red. And it's a whole spectrum of colors. Para you just look at it for like a quick glance, and then you can already tell na, okay, across income classes, Gen Z Filipinos strongly agree. Now you need several jobs, several sources of income to stay afloat, to earn enough for your lifestyle, for your basic needs, etc. So at least like with one look pa lang, you can already see na, okay, consistent siya across income classes. But sometimes, it's not that straightforward. Minsan kasi yung mga data sources natin, mas madumi yung data. Or if anyone here has worked with data before, I'm sure na-encounter nyo yung mga pieces of government data na naka-PDF. And it's not very accessible for people who want to make charts, graphs, who want to make sense of yung data. If you're working with data, working with numbers, ideal talaga that you use Google Sheets, Excel files, CSVs. Tapos pag naka-PDF kasi, naka-preserve yung formatting ng charts, so it's hard to work with. So this is a sample of data that I worked with, galing sa DOLE. This is a summary of like yung minimum wage orders, administrative orders per region for non-agriculture workers. Tapos historical siya. So it's all regions throughout the years. Tapos yung iba't ibang thresholds for minimum wage. Kaya lang yun nga, naka-PDF. So I had a hard time with that. But luckily naman, there are tools available to make life easier for all of us. So if ever you encounter government data or any kind of data na naka-PDF and you want to play around with the data, there are tools that can help you extract yung ganong data. So this is a free tool called, sorry, medyo maliit siya. It's called Tabula, Tabula. What you can do is you upload yung mga PDFs mo, tapos it can extract yung tables for you. So at least like mas madali yung pag-encode ng data when you want to transfer to a Google Sheet, an Excel file, a CSV file. Just to warn you guys siguro no, na it's not always super accurate kasi minsan in my experience parang minsan may nawawalang row, may nawawalang column. So you have to double check na lang. Double check with the source material kung may nawalang information when you're encoding yung data. Ito naman, I had to do a lot of cleaning when I wanted to get yung real minimum wage rates. So yung real minimum wage rates kasi, iba kasi siya sa nominal minimum wage rates. Kasi nominal, syempre, it's at face value, no? Na parang ito yung minimum wage rates in NCR, in itong region. Pero syempre, it doesn't account for inflation. So I wanted to compute for that eh. I wanted to compute na, okay, so ito yung nominal minimum wage rate sa NCR, mga 570 something. And then how much would that, parang giving inflation into consideration, no? Parang how much is that actually worth? Parang ganon. So yung ginawa ko actually is after in-encode ko yung data for the minimum wage rates, I had to do some computing pa eh. I got this from Ibon Foundation, yung formula nila for computing real minimum wage rates. So that's, I had to multiply pa yung nominal minimum wage rates with yung consumer price index for the month. So that's also another indicator of the economy. And then from there, you can get yung actual minimum wage rates na may inflation into account. So after inayos ko yung data, I got to upload it din sa Flourish. And then I got to make charts showing yung real minimum wage rates. So ito yun, per region kasi siya. So syempre yung pinakamataas, itong blue, that's from NCR. all the other regions are at the bottom. Yung, if I recall correctly, yung pinakamababa na minimum wage rate is sa BARM. Tapos here, you can check, actually, like if you visit yung story ko sa Rappler, may drop-down menu. You can toggle alin yung, if you want to show all regions or like, pa isa-isa lang yung regions. Just to show like ano yung minimum wage rates in what location for the past 10 years. And it's great kasi it tells a story in itself no, na parang ito yung minimum wage rates. This is what minimum wage is worth for the past 10 years. And kung naalala nyo yung chart ko for inflation, no, parang laging may spikes, laging may ups and downs. Whereas itong real minimum wage rates, practically it's flat eh. So that's already a story in itself na inflation is going up, pero yung minimum wage rates natin, it doesn't catch up with inflation. This is a story in itself already. So this is one of the ways that you can already tell stories with data. Kahit it takes a bit more work. Sometimes kasi di naman siya ganun ka straightforward. Yung data sources mo and yung charts mo. So you might have to put in more effort for certain data sources depending on yung story and yung project or yung research paper ninyo. And then I got to put it all together naman sa story. I got to weave it in with like may context from yung case studies ko. Like, okay, ito yung mga personal anecdotes ng Gen Z Filipinos na nakausap ko. Like, okay, itong one of the case studies parang she lived in a very expensive city in Manila. Tapos mag-isa lang siya, so she had to take care of rent. Pero yung isang case study naman nasa province naman, pero he had to provide for like yung mga younger siblings niya. And then I juxtapose that with like yung mga data sources, yung mga charts, tapos syempre may context din from like yung expert and the survey. So I hope you can check this out if you'd like to check it out sa Rappler, yung story ko from on Gen Z Filipinos. Like it weaves everything into a cohesive story. Na this is what real Gen Z Filipinos feel because I talk to them. This is what the survey results tell us, na nahirapan sila to earn a living, to make a living, to save up. Tapos, ito naman yung state ng inflation, ito naman yung, tapos parang di naman nakikeep up yung minimum wage. So that tells a story in itself and it's up to you how you want to weave all of that together. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but Rappler has a sister company called The Nerve. It's our data partner. So I also work with The Nerve frequently and we launched this series earlier this year. It's called Decoded. You can visit our stories at rappler.com/topic/decoded. Tapos we always talk about different issues, different pressing issues as told in data. So I'll show you some examples kasi we use several kinds of data for our stories to talk about different topics. So if earlier yung Gen Z story ko, mostly government data, survey data, I'll show you different kinds of stories that we've already written in the past. Here, we also write about politics. So this is actually very similar din sa, kasi survey data yung source nito eh. So we ran a survey on our website about the upcoming 2025 senatorial election. So kunwari, we asked Filipinos, what do you look for in an ideal senator? What issues do you think upcoming senators, aspiring senators should tackle once they get elected? So this is how we made sense of yung responses. So you can see here na, okay, from the survey shows na, okay, readers are concerned about corruption and inflation. Ito naman, yung readers ng Rappler, they value integrity and honesty when looking for a senator. And we also have charts in the stories, if you check them out, na to show ano yung breakdown ng responses. The Nerve also, we specialize in social media data kasi. So we also work with a lot of data from different platforms to make sense of what people think about certain issues and how they're talking about it online. So kunwari ito, this is about the first story about dating apps. It's about how people on X or formerly Twitter, they talked about dating apps na nagjo-joke lang talaga sila about dating apps, may concern sila about safety, but may concern sila na it's only for casual things, not a serious relationship, etc. Ito naman, on the rear right, it's about ADHD videos on TikTok. Kasi ang dami kasi nag-viral na TikTok videos about health conditions like ADHD. Tapos, yun nga, parang it prompted health experts to worry about, I guess, like yung how Gen Z addresses their health eh. Kunwari na they're only relying on TikTok advice, di naman professional yung advice nila. And then we studied like yung topics talked about when people on TikTok post about ADHD. So yung iba, they talk about personal experiences, yung iba self-help resources, etc. And then also, if, syempre, in the age that we live in today, no, na social media is really a central point of, communication, it's also important that we speak yung language ng social media audiences natin. And the tips that I gave earlier naman for how to tell stories with data, we can also use that in, communicating with social media. Now, figure out what you want to say, ano yung important info or data that you want to mention. Tsaka, syempre, you have to meet them halfway. You have to make sure yung social media content was understandable and accessible. So here's some, from our Decoded series, here are some social media executions we used. So this story was written by my teammate who recently got married. Tas sila ng husband niya, they agreed they wouldn't actively try to have kids. Kasi may phenomenon din that millennials and Gen Z Filipinos want to be dinks, double income, no kids couples. So she told her personal story, tapos may data din kami from an FGD. And then for social media naman, to make it more understandable, nag-produce kami ng comics to show people na ano yung personal story ng teammate ko and what young Filipinos think about having kids today. Okay, ako yun. So actually, sa Nerve, one of our specialties, like our areas of expertise is disinformation. So actually, medyo madugom, nosebleed talaga yung disinformation, diba? It's very info overload. So for example, we've written about gender disinformation in the past. So gender disinformation is online propaganda used to attack women. Syempre, it's very educational, very heavy. It's a very heavy topic. So, yung challenge kasi namin, we're still experimenting din naman. We try to make it understandable by videos. We're still experimenting with vertical videos. So, yung ginawa namin is, since gender disinformation naman yung topic, it's about women, we tried to talk about it through a Get Ready With Me video. So, nag-makeup ako while talking about the topic. You have to make sure na understandable siya to your audience, the people that you want to talk to. So just a final takeaway from telling stories with data. Syempre, I think data, statistics, it always comes off as intimidating. It's very easy to get scared and, terrified siguro when you're working with numbers, no? But I want to debunk that myth and say that data doesn't always have to be intimidating naman. As long as you find a way to tell a story, as long as you find a way to make it understandable, as long as you find a way to use data to reach the audience as you want, and as long as, it's very meaningful, you get to do good things with the data that you gather and analyze, then, data can actually be very accessible for everybody, no matter what topic and industry you're from or what topic you're talking about. So thank you for listening. Thank you so much. I hope you learned a lot from this discussion.
Thank you, Gabby, for that presentation. Our second presentation is titled Storytelling for Science, Amplifying Research for Impact, which will be presented by Ms. Ingrid Espinosa, independent consultant for science communication and lecturer at the Ateneo de Manila University. Ms. Espinosa will discuss how simplifying complex topics can make scientific research more accessible and impactful. Her insights will help us better connect research findings to the people who need the most. Ms. Espinosa is a science communicator. She studied Master of Science in Science Communication at Imperial College of London and a Bachelor of Science in Health Sciences from Ateneo de Manila University with a minor in public health with creative writing. Before this, she worked for 6 years in the public health research, studying public health programs and helping inform policy. She has also done freelance writing and multimedia and coordinated policy briefs to help the COVID-19 response. She has engaged with various charities, nonprofit, and government organizations in both research and strategic communication. She also advocates for supporting our Filipino scientists and for multiplying the impact of their work, particularly social science, through science communication. Let us all welcome Ms. Ingrid Espinosa.
All right, so thank you for that lovely introduction, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for braving Manila traffic. I know it's so cliche, but it's so true, so I have to say it. Good morning, and thanks for coming and listening to our talk today. So I'll be talking about, storytelling for science and how we can use it for impact, especially since I know that I think the people here today, right, people who use SERPI, I'm guessing you guys are researchers, policymakers, decision makers, right? And so we all use data, we all use research. Either we make it or we use it to make decisions. So it sounds like, there's this apocryphal quote ni Einstein, kuno, di ba, na if you had an hour to solve a problem, you spend 55 minutes trying to understand the question, and then 5 minutes to actually solve it. And I think if you use SERPI, you contribute to it, it sounds like you're the type of people who do that. And it's great, right? So we talk to our fellow researchers, our fellow policymakers, in a way, in our own groups also, in our own elite groups. And that's fine, it works, that works. But our role as researchers and decision makers, and actually our understanding of science itself, has changed over the years, and I'd like to talk about that. Noted political scientist Roger Pielke has said that if scientists had the choice to remain above the fray, that is, above participating in society or, the dirtiness of participating in civic activities, they no longer have this luxury. So, today, scholars generally agree that the scientific process doesn't just involve scientists or not even just rulers or decision makers, but really we're increasing the number of people and the kinds of people who are involved in the scientific process. And especially in a knowledge-based society that we live in now, we are all invited to work on community-based research, and not just that, but really contribute to the development of our communities. And so we're moving from an idea of, already science in society, that's a great idea. We acknowledge the context that we work in. But we also think about science moving with society. So we know that impact, right? It's not just about productivity, it's also about real-world influence. We know that. But also, it's interesting to consider not just like science being applied into communities and society like in like a one-directional way, or not even in a two-directional way, but really, how can we involve communities themselves in how we do research, what research we do, and shaping how we construct knowledge and science. Which brings me, a close analog of this is how in science communication, we think about there's a deficit model before, like you're uninformed and then you become informed. That works before. And then we thought, maybe we can think of science working in kind of a dialogue. So, okay, we talk to each other. But now we can also think of science as participation. So we don't just teach each other things, but actually we co-create and construct knowledge together and welcome different points of view and maybe untraditional forms of knowledge. And so participation is seen as a stronger form of engagement by the public, both with scientific ideas and with the governance of science itself. And engagement, determines new environments, new genres, and new sensitivity to the needs of public science. And we're seeing this a lot now, right? So as I mentioned, I'm quite into the study also of science communication. So a lot of what I'll be talking about is based on current research. But some research suggests that while many scientists, researchers have a traditional view of science and communicating it as like education, ganyan, more scientists are also welcoming this view of science as co-creation and having more participatory activities and engagements in how they do it. Right. And we're seeing that now. So for instance, we often have more things like outreach with communities, co-creation workshops, and even in my work also recently, it's been really interesting that, for instance, even the fact that when we have workshops, right, we construct knowledge, we don't just invite the heads of the regions, we invite people who work on the ground to share their knowledge. We don't just present frameworks, right? But we act and like kind of adapt it, but we create our own frameworks. We look at the knowledge on the ground and we, as scientists, facilitate, formalizing that to be part of our mainstream knowledge. And I think it's hard work, definitely. I think anybody here who has tried to invite their stakeholders, get clearance from different barangays, it's hard work, but I find that it's so worth it when you get people from, check kayo ng 5 out of 17 regions dumating sa workshop nyo and you hear their stories, I think it's so worth it. And that's the only way we can get really a better understanding and a complete understanding of what we want to study. And so that really brings me to this, bigger idea of science communication. So if you want to engage people, usually we do that through what we call, or that involves what we call science communication. And that really is something I'd love to explore in the Philippines right now. So it was mentioned earlier that I've worked a lot in public health research, so I've probably worked with some of you guys, baka nag-email ako sa inyo dati, or humingi na ako ng data. And I really enjoyed it. I loved getting to understand, trying to understand our situation so that more Filipinos can achieve health equity and have better access to health. And I love the community of different people, my mentors, the people I worked with, the statisticians, the data encoders, ganyan. And it's a lot of work, as you guys know, who publish. Pero nasasayangan lang ako kasi, diba, you do the research, you publish it, you make the report, you present to your funders, and then maybe you make a journal, great, that's already a great step. Not everyone even publishes, diba, in a journal. Kapagod eh, like it's not like you get paid extra for that. And then, you spend like a year, at least 6 months doing this research, and it could make such a difference. But I think that's limited by who gets to hear about it and who can make use of it. I think that communicating is an easy way to multiply that impact and multiply the efforts, the results of the hard work that you've already put in. And in fact, I think it's summarized quite well here that not only does it multiply impact, but it's important in itself. So there's this quote I really like: people are dying because we can't communicate in ways that allow us to understand one another. That sounds like an exaggeration, but I don't think it is. So that's by Alan Alda. He's also a great advocate for science communication. And actually, he is not a doctor, but he played a doctor for a long time on TV. He's an actor. And what perspective he lends here is he talks a lot about empathy and how important it is to understand, really actually understand each other when we communicate. And I think that became very clear, right, during the pandemic. It's a case study for the ages. From now on, all the textbooks have COVID, especially in science communication, because not only was it about understanding complex topics, but it was about watching science work in front of our eyes, diba? How often does it happen na you actually see we have little knowledge about something and then we update that knowledge and we update it and then we update it and we find out what we want to do. So I think that was really an interesting experience in the lens of science communication, and we could learn so much from it. And obviously, our lives and the lives of the people we love depended on it. Um, Personally, I also saw this when we had a project on a campaign. So, nung toward the tail end ng COVID, no? So, earlier, no una, policy briefs, ganyan, what should decision makers do? Kasi it was more of that situation. Then later on, when we started to come out of quarantine, no, people had a bit more individual choice in how they could approach it. And what we wanted to do was try to just help people be more confident to get out and get back to living their lives. So we made this parang communication campaign to help people minimize the risk. And we tried to target all life stages, no? Children, young adults, seniors, parents of infants, and children. And for each of those, of course, they had different needs and concerns. And it was then appropriate to tailor our responses to each of them. And we did that also, again, through participation in a series of workshops. And I think we were only able to do this effectively, really, because of how big digital had become even more during the pandemic, no? You don't even need have to think of printing. Nung college ako, nagka-canvas pa ako ng mga saan mura mag-print, di ba? Maganda ba yung gawa? Kaya ba nila in 2 days? But with digital, we didn't even have to think of that. You just create the materials, put it out there, have a plan, of course, but that already eliminated so many of our problems. And so, that just one example, right? But I think, you know, digital has really become the way that we interact with so much of the world today, and we cannot take it for granted. And it has huge, you know, consequences for everyone, right? So when we think of digital, right, we think of websites, ebooks, blogs, social online support groups. That's very popular with patient groups. I want to ask, when was the last time you held a journal article like in your hands, like as a book? Because I don't remember the last time I held like a printed journal article. Like mostly I see it, not even like on a website, on LinkedIn, on Facebook pages of my colleagues, of PIDs, yeah. So everything really is digital now. And especially in research, no, it has had profound implications. So because of digital, there has been an increase in collaborative research across boundaries, across countries, across regions, across discipline. And this has really helped research have deeper insights about what we want to understand, be more inclusive, and leads to more groundbreaking insights. And you know, digital is so many things, but I guess in a nutshell, it's these things. So what it gives us is that digital is multimodal. There's so many channels, there's so many touch points, there's so many formats we can use. It's interactive. So your user is not just passively consuming information, right? But they're actually really part of it. They're reacting, they're shaping the conversation. It's ubiquitous ways of publishing and of interpreting data. And what does this mean? So digital has brought a few trends, especially with regard to research. And we can walk through some of those trends right now. So one is that digital opens the door for open science. So this was mentioned earlier in our introduction. No? So basically, open science means that there's a preference now for access for knowledge. We're not gaping. We want everyone to know everything. We're very transparent. And, oops, I'm behind. And so this has brought a lot of, you know, pros and cons. So one is that with open science, usually there's increased speed and access. So for example, I think if we're familiar with preprints, so journals and preprints. So preprints are when you're able to publish some knowledge, some research, even before you are accepted by a journal. So, it's, especially nung COVID, this was important kasi matagal yung journal approval process, diba? With preprints, you can publish immediately, it's easier, it's faster. It's great because we get to share knowledge, but also there is that risk that because it hasn't gone through that, you know, journal peer review process, it might not have the same standards of academic and methodological rigor that we're used to and that we come to think of when we think of research. Um, and there is a corresponding responsibility there, and it doesn't have to be held by one person. Another benefit, I think, of open science is that it enhances visibility. And I think this is especially interesting for people doing socioeconomic research, right? So there's this idea that people who are actually on the ground have a unique advantage in capturing realities as they are. You have a much deeper understanding of things. And with open access, hindi nyo na kailangan makipag-git-gitan sa specific journals, no? You can have as much space as you want, and you can share, and you can see other people. It's really interesting, even just as a technical person, or maybe this is not my field, I love to read about, for instance, what's happening in the North, what's happening in health and education. And I love reading about what makes, for instance, millennials. I love reading about what makes us us. And it's very important that you make your community visible by publishing about them and publishing what you understand about them. Another trend is that digital makes room for shifting audiences. So on a related note, right? Because digital, is so big, it's everywhere, it's hard now to kind of box in who gets to read your work. You never know. We can never predict how we can characterize who's reading our work. Unpredictable identities and characteristics. And boundaries are now fading. For instance, even just between the professional and the private, right? And a key idea here also is that audiences are active participants in how we communicate. One big example of this is how information or disinformation can go viral. So readers aren't just like reading, okay, I learned something new. They're magnifying whatever they read. And so they're active parts of this communication process. Finally, digital really changes the science policy interface, and I think this is something of interest to our groups here. For several reasons, right? So one, because of digital, there are now more frequent, more transparent, and more reliable interactions between the research community and the policy community. And there's also a shift to more co-creative or interactive formats. So as I mentioned, kung dati, meeting lang, presentation, ngayon, talaga nagkakaroon ng mga outreach, nagkakaroon ng mga hackathon, nagkakaroon ng mga roadshow, nagkakaroon ng communities forming the frameworks. And that has really changed how we understand each other and how we create policy about that. And third, digital has made way for shorter and more visual media because policymakers are facing increasing pressures on their time, their expertise, but there's so much information. There's more pressure now to get something to them. And the way to do that is, one, to have shorter. So for instance, yung mga policy brief natin, diba? Agenda style, like bullet points. And also more visual media. And we have here also the importance of narrative. So it's been said that the background noise gets much louder, especially in STEM. Therefore, there's a growing need to communicate in a clearer, simpler, and more engaging way. And it's really interesting that, in studies about policymakers themselves who make science, who make use of science, they themselves also really say that key figures, for instance, don't tell the complete story. So it's important to find that narrative to give context, especially when it comes to quantitative data, where the numbers alone don't make sense, but they have to fit into a story. And I think it's really interesting how this has gotten so much traction. Of course, different levels, right? But for instance, the EU has training sessions for scientists interacting with policymakers on storytelling and narrative. And you're all researchers here, you're all evidence informed. If you don't believe me, believe the research. Narrative has been shown to improve comprehension, generate interest and engagement, increase self-efficacy, influence world belief, and be successful in persuading. So it can do that more than facts alone. And so really, there is this increasing importance of learning how to do narrative when you are working between scientists and policymakers. And one just sidebar, this special note that I want to say is that you don't have to do this alone. So I have colleagues, right, in different groups, and sometimes I get a question na, Ingrid, anong software yung i-download ko? Paano ako maggagawa ng videos? Paano ako magsusulat ng article? And I say, if you are interested genuinely, kung gusto nyo talaga gumawa ng video, hilig nyo yon, sure, go ahead. If you want to write an article, sure. But if you don't want to and you just feel like you have to, you don't have to. You can work with other people who are interested in that. I think what's really great is that, like as Gabby mentioned, there are so many tools available now. You have tools like Flourish. Google also has a free tool for data visualization. We have this new genre of journalism called explainer journalism, right? Storytellers are so much more equipped now. There are agencies who are specific to science and to research whom you can work with. And I think it's best never to force yourself into doing something, but really leverage partnerships and work on the strengths of your own skills. I just wanted to really mention that. So certainly we're seeing that narrative is important. And narrative communication, what is it really but storytelling? And I could rattle off, again, more statistics, more studies about how storytelling is effective. But I think one big advantage of it is that storytelling is a tool that you can use with anyone, anywhere, and there's no limit to the impact you can get. You can do great research, but you can make so much more out of it if you can tell stories with it. So, of course, we have to talk about what good stories are like, right? So effective stories, I would say, are memorable. They stick to you. Classic fairy tales have, survived the years because they are such memorable stories. Second, good stories are entertaining or at least palatable. So some people might think this is a challenge, especially when they're telling stories about research. But I don't think it should be. We see a lot of, for instance, documentaries, late-night show hosts who can talk about difficult topics, right? Even Vice Ganda can talk about feminism and LGBTQ on her show. And she's able to hold our attention because she's able to tell it in an entertaining way. And I think as researchers, you already have this interest. You already have this curiosity about making sense of the world. And it's just a matter of sharing that curiosity and sharing that excitement to other people. And finally, and I think this is what struck me, good stories also support relationship building. So I think that good stories are not just like for the moment, I tell you a story where we think it's nice and that's the end of it. I think good stories form long-form bonds that stay much longer than stories and stay longer than that interaction and can help influence your own future interactions. So just to run through a few examples which I like. So I think stories that are memorable can come from, having a good headline, from using good analogies. For instance, food security before, for me, was such an abstract concept. But when somebody explained it to me in the sense of, may makakain ba tayo tonight? That was so much more memorable to me, and that became a much better story. Comparisons of scale, words, picking out good, interesting headlines, that can be ways to make stories memorable. Entertaining, I already mentioned, no? I love watching really good talk show hosts because they're able to take difficult topics and make it interesting. Even just think like TV Patrol, diba? ANC. They're able to take really difficult topics but make it interesting. And finally, stories support relationship building. The spokespeople that we would see every day in a crisis, we form a relationship with them. the barangay health worker whom we report to, who we see when we're sick, or maybe at the clinic, wherever you go, we form a relationship. When we tell stories to each other about our day, about ito yung side effect ng bakuna ko, it's not just telling them that, masakit. It's forming that relationship. It's forming that trust that will help us in the future. Speaking of trust, right, one of the biggest stories that I always talk about is the dengue vaccine. So I think you might be familiar with this, right? So several years ago, there was this potential for a dengue vaccine. Great, diba? Nobody likes dengue. It affects kids. We hate it. The only way to really prevent it is fogging, environmental ways, right? So there's this potential. If you can vaccinate against it, great. So for me, initially, that was a story of potential, of hope. But eventually, as we know, right, it got embroiled, it got fast-tracked, it got politicized, it got very dramatic. And so it became a story of tension, of drama, and a story of distrust. And we paid for this. For years later, we would have resurgence of measles. We would find cases of polio, things that we should not be worrying about anymore. We used to have a very high vaccine confidence rate, pero it really dropped because of that. And that's how important stories are. They affect how we make decisions, and it affects the lives around us. But that's not the end of this story, though. I'm very happy to say that our vaccine confidence has been rising, and that's through the painstaking efforts of our healthcare workers who've really been doing a lot of community outreach and taking the time to build relationships, tell stories to each other about the possible benefits of vaccines, telling people what they want to know, never underestimate people's intelligence, only their knowledge. And now we have rising vaccine confidence again. And you know, there's so many stories I can tell you. UHC is also one of my favorites, universal healthcare. And again, this is a product, I think, of researchers telling stories to policymakers, telling stories to NGOs, telling stories to communities, telling stories to patient groups. And that has led us to great advancements, you know, towards that shared mission of equitable health for Filipinos. All that to say that stories are not just perhaps how we view the world, but really they shape how we live in the world. And this matters, especially in research, especially in science, because that is what the world runs on today. And I'd like to end this with a story from an author I really like, Ursula Le Guin. So she's a sci-fi writer. She writes a lot of dystopias. So a lot of sad stories where everything is wrong. And those are important, no? Di ba nauso yun dati? Like Hunger Games, Maze Runner, Divergent. Everything is bad in those stories. And it tells us a lot about ourselves. She writes stories like that. But she also tells about how important utopias are. How can we imagine the perfect world? How can we imagine the world that we want to see? Because we can only make happen what we can imagine. And we can only make happen what we tell stories about. And we live out those stories. And I'd love to hear the stories that you find in your research and how you make them, and hearing all the different, diverse, wonderful voices in those stories. So thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you so much, Miss Ingrid, for that presentation. We will now proceed to our third and final presentation titled Maximizing the Digital Space for Research Communication, Insights from EDCOM 2. Our invited presenter, Mr. Luigi Conti, is the Communications and Advocacy Head of the Second Congressional Commission on Education, or EDCOM 2, will join us today, and he will explore how to maximize the use of digital platforms for sharing research. He will share practical tips on how to reach diverse audiences, from policymakers to the public, and creating a stronger connection through tailored communication strategies. Mr. Conti has had multiple stints in the communications and marketing in educational institutions here in the Philippines, Singapore, and Australia. Throughout his long involvement in the education sector, both here and abroad, he has made it his mission to help raise the quality of the Philippines education sector. Now, let's give a warm round of applause to Mr. Luigi Conti.
Thank you, Zeke. And good morning to everyone. Hope everyone's wide awake. Gising pa ba? Gising pa ba? Okay. Two things before I start. Okay, next. Maximizing the digital space for research communication. Two things on my agenda. Why communicate your research? And how do we maximize the digital space? Really quick lang to and really digestible. So hold on to your horses, okay? Hold on to your seats. So first, why do we need to communicate research? I'll just lay out the reasons why we need to, bakit nga ba natin kailangang ilahad sa general public yung research natin? And number two, yung practical tips on how to maximize yung mga social media platforms natin and other digital tools. Okay, before all that though, sino ba ako? Sino ba ako? I'm Luigi Conti. I graduated BA Psych in UP Diliman and I have units in MA Media Studies. That's me na medyo a few hairline inches ago. And then I also have background in startups and education. Startups and education. Those are two very different things, but both have to deal with data. Data and communication. And using that data to communicate whatever we need to communicate for the objective of a startup or an educational institution. Or in this instance, the Second Congressional Commission on Education. What is it? The Second Congressional Commission on Education, or EDCOM2, is a Philippine commission tasked to undertake a comprehensive national assessment of the country's education sector. This is just one of our consultations. Hanapin niyo ko dyan, yung pinakamalapad ang noo, nasa gitna. Oops, what happened? Nasa gitna. Okay. This is one of our consultations sa Ateneo. And what we do at EDCOM2 is we consult with teachers, students, parents, and those stakeholders in the education sector to make sure that our education system gets better. Because right now, our education system is facing a crisis. Okay? How do we communicate that? That is what I'll deal into later. But research communication plays a big role in my work at EDCOM. Kasi EDCOM has partnered with a lot of institutions, including some of you here, especially the ever-loyal and ever-dependable PIDS. Thank you, PIDS. But also DLSU, UP, ID Insight, and other organizations to conduct research about the education sector. Ang kakalabasan niyan at the end of EDCOM to 100 plus publications. Just imagine, 100 plus publications and trying to communicate 100 plus publications, all of their findings, all of their policy recommendations to the general public, to policymakers, and to stakeholders in the education sector. That is the task of the Communications Division of EDCOM2. But first, the first question, why communicate your research? Without being philosophical, kasi kanina nagmumuni-muni ako, bakit ko ba tinatanong tong why communicate your research? Bakit ka pa nagre-research in the first place kung hindi mo alam yun, di ba? Why communicate your research is a question that should have been answered before you have even started your research. Because before you start your research, you needed to have a goal. You needed to have a goal and you needed to have an audience in mind for your particular research. You gotta ask, who is your research for? in the broadest sense, these are three broad categories that I think applies to all of us here, publishers and researchers. Policymakers, researchers, and the lay people. Yang tatlo are broad categories of our audience, right? Pwede mo pa siyang i-subcategorize eh. Pwede ka pang mag-specify, for example, lay people, pwede ka pang teachers, students. Sa researchers, pwedeng yung mga colleagues mo, other researchers, other institutions as well, policymakers, people in Congress, people in the Senate, etc., etc. After asking that question and answering that question, you gotta ask what is your goal. And for policymakers, for example, to make informed decisions in government informed by research, for researchers to help us understand social behavior, and for lay people to help uplift social welfare. Kasi, at the end of it all, scientific knowledge has a positive social impact. Raise your hand if you agree. Don't raise your hand if you don't agree. Almost all of the people here don't agree. Okay, I'm joking. But scientific knowledge has a positive social impact. That is, I think, an idea we all share as researchers here. Access to education and scientific knowledge is associated with better health, the empowerment of citizens, and active participation in public affairs, fostering a more engaged citizenry and improving employability. Yang tatlong studies na yan, that supports that particular finding. And that it also is supported by an economist, actually a Nobel laureate, si Joseph Stiglitz, who has this theory, the knowledge gap theory, that says that ang inisip niya dati, the old way of thinking it is, kaya may underdeveloped nations, may developing nations, and may developed nations is because there is an object gap. May mahirap in terms of resources. May hindi mayaman na tao, na countries, and may mayaman na countries. Pero, what he formulated pagdating sa knowledge gap is that we now realize that this is one of the factors, but there's another factor that's very, very important, which is the gap in knowledge. Closing that gap is one of the most important strategies for development. The key word there is development. And I think that's why we're here all together in this room and yung mga nasa Zoom. Is because we believe that scientific knowledge is very crucial for development. Ito is a brief cursory survey of the front page of PIDS. Ito yung, of Sir P, sorry. Yan yung latest publications. And all of them all of them deals with development and making sure that our countrymen and the Philippines develop and may policy implications lahat ng research that we put out. For example, yan, financial sustainability of higher education institutions in the Philippines. Bago lang yan, I think, Zeke, right? And ito actually, kailangan ko pang i-share with our EDCOM team. But all of our research in the socio-economic sphere has to deal with making sure that the country develops. It makes sure that we need to make sure that all of our research is inclusive and uplifts our country. Okay? Science isn't finished until it is communicated. Yan ang sabi ni Sir Mark Walport, the UK Government Chief Scientific Advisor. The communication to wider audiences is part of the job of being a scientist. It is the part of the job of being a researcher. And so how you communicate is absolutely vital. Publication in a paper is not the end-all and be-all of your science of your study. Your research does not end after you publish Elsevier or SRP. It lives on way afterwards. Babasahin yan ng researchers after you published it. And hopefully, mababasa yan ng general public. It does not live in a vacuum. Now, how do we maximize the digital space? Okay? We go on to our second question. How do we maximize the digital space? First, go where your audiences is or are. Plural or singular siya. Kasi pwedeng madaming audiences, pwedeng isa lang yung audience mo. Depende sa research paper mo. Depende dun sa topic or depende dun sa study. Social media platforms are not homogeneous. Different platforms have different demographics. So ito sa Pilipinas to. Number one, of course, si Facebook. Sino ba ditong hindi nasa Facebook? Taas ng kamay ng hindi nasa Facebook. Walang hindi nasa Facebook. Sabi yan sa survey, GWI survey, 95% of Filipino internet users use Facebook. Almost ubiquitous ang Facebook. Everybody has Facebook in the Philippines. After that, Facebook Messenger. Pag may Facebook ka, of course, may Facebook Messenger ka na. TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Telegram is a messaging app, pero most of those fall into the low 30s na. So, what we decided sa EDCOM actually was first prioritize Facebook, Messenger, Instagram, and Twitter. Kasi TikTok is a whole other platform, short-form video platform. And I'll get there in a few. But first, yan yung finocus namin. You can find EDCOM 2PH in Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Why TikTok though? That's a question that is very, very contentious para sa mga researchers, right? Kasi may misconception ng TikTok na parang ano siya, parang it doesn't foster as much understanding or it doesn't foster deeper connection. But hindi natin ma-avoid yan eh. Kasi we need to go where our audience is. And based on study, most of our younger audience, i.e. yung students and teachers, ay nandoon. 68% of Filipinos aged 16 to 64 consider TikTok their most used social media platform. TikTok is also the third most popular social media platform in the country with 9.7% saying it's their favorite. And biruin nyo yun, 40 hours, 46 minutes ang spend ng mga tao sa TikTok per month. And Android app lang yan, hindi pa kasama yung iPhone. So, it makes sense na pumunta tayo sa TikTok. Especially since nandun lahat ng tao. And especially since kailangan nating ma-reach yung audience na yun eh. If isipin natin na hindi naman nagpo-foster ng understanding ang TikTok, yung mga 90 minutes lang yun, hindi naman siya ganoon ka-conducive to learning, we can change that. We as researchers and we as communicators can change that. And I really believe that. And I'll show you later how we do it at EDCOM. Also, digital is not necessarily social. Don't be limited with social media. Sabi ni Zeke sa akin before all of this started, yung topic ko is social media space. But then, what my understanding with it is utilizing all tools at your disposal pagdating sa communicating with your audience. Whether it's social media or digital media. In this case, yung pinapakita ko sa inyo on the right side, that is a newsletter that we send out twice a month that supports, that links to our website and has a fuller understanding of particular issues. Nandyan yung PR namin, nandyan yung mga studies, mga newly released studies, and meron ding mga invites sa webinars. So whoever downloads our reports or our studies, we collect their emails sa website, and then we send out. They're automatically included in our newsletter if you opt in. So that one, but also this one. We also make use of our website, which is a repository not only of our publications, but also a repository of all of our press releases. So may record dyan ng aming mga press releases, ng mga nilalabas namin. So utilize all tools at your disposal. Your website, newsletter, meron pa ngang iba na text eh. Pero that doesn't fit our purpose na. Yung mga ganon, that is how you should utilize the digital sphere. Also, our press releases, make use of press releases and the press. They are not your enemy. Make sure that it reaches, your research reaches the press as well by sending out PRs, by sending out media events and invites for them. Okay? Think differently is another tip. Scientific communication is fundamentally different from communication with the general public. Science communicators focus on effective storytelling, sabi nga ni Ms. Ingrid kanina, which often has a different flow and structure from the writing used in scientific articles. How is this so? Scientific communications typically start with details. Ito yan, itong nasa the triangle on your right side. They typically start with details, then increase in breadth towards the conclusion. So it starts with background, supporting details, and results and conclusions. In the inverted pyramid, conclusions are presented first, followed by further details, narrowing down of the triangle. So you communicate with the general public by starting with the bottom line, by your conclusion, and then you ask, so what? Bakit? Why does it matter? And then you use supporting details to support that. Makikita natin yan in action later when I show you yung actual post sa EDCOM. Another tip is tell compelling stories. Stories come in all shapes and sizes. Kita natin sa presentation kanina, especially pagdating sa graphs. These are actual screen caps from the EDCOM page and what our posts. Recently, we did a story about education financing in the Philippines. Makikita na malaki nga, on paper, malaki nga mag-spend ang Pilipinas sa edukasyon. Malaki yung budget. But we are not spending it on the right things. We are not focusing on the right areas to spend it on, particularly basic ed and ECCD. So, nagsimula kami sa first post na to, the Philippines has rarely met international benchmarks for government spending in education. Yan yung headline. Yan yung unang makikita ng viewer mo. Pag nag-scroll sa mobile, right? Makikita niya, oo nga no, hindi nga kita. Oo nga, hindi nakikita kasi sa dilaw, hindi na-meet. 2017 lang na-meet yung international benchmark for government spending in education. Kitang-kita dyan eh. Tapos, babasahin yung caption, and then, yun yung supporting data, and then makikita yung graph. All of those supports the headline, which is the Philippines has rarely met international benchmarks for government spending in education. And hindi kami tumigil doon sa isang post na yun. Sa second post, the government has increased education spending, but the rising number of learners has offset these gains. Tumataas nga yung spending over the years, pero dumadami naman yung estudyante. Naghahabol tayo, right? And then sa third post, the government has consistently provided less funding to primary education students than those in secondary and tertiary education. Makikita nyo that it tells a story. Specific yung storya na yon until we get to fourth and the fifth in the series. The Philippines falls significantly below international benchmarks on per student spending, and at the end, yung end naming post, kinompare na namin sa Vietnam. Vietnam achieved high levels of student learning by prioritizing investment in primary education. Makikita nyo in the red, baliktad yung spending ng Pilipinas, yung shape ng spending ng Pilipinas, at yung shape ng spending ng Vietnam. Nag-spend sila on earlier years, in kindergarten, in pre-primary, and primary. While we, dito sa Pilipinas, we spend more on tertiary. Ganoon nagtetel ng story pagdating sa graphs, at least in EDCOM's case. We try our best to make sure that the bottom line is at the forefront of our posts and at the forefront of our messaging, and then supported lang siya by the graphs. Okay, may exercise ako. Ito is ang graph that shows, of course, change in Greenland ice sheet mass since 2002 in billions of metric tons. One of the researchers that I found while researching this particular topic told me to break down the graph in a step-by-step description and try to anticipate what the audience might be wondering. Should I focus on those ripples I see in the plot? Is the downward trend the point of the graph? And is the steepness of the plot important? So yon, 1, 2. But may sinasabi siya for her students kasi teacher to eh. Ito yung quick exercise. Write a short descriptive title for the graph. Illustrate the axes, the y and the x axes individually, and describe their units and trend, and describe the shape, focusing on the part that communicate the story. Who likes to take a gander? If you can understand this particular graph. Medyo complex siya, pero who likes to take a gander? Try lang. Okay, so we can write a short descriptive title for the graph, which is, meron ng clue dun eh, change in Greenland ice sheet mass. So pwede nating i-show na it's a decline in Greenland ice sheet mass from 2002 to 2017. Magandang title yon, right? Illustrate the axes individually. Tingnan natin, ano ba yung x-axis and the y-axis? The x-axis, it's time, right? It's time, it's years. It starts 2002 and then year by year, 1 year yung intervals niya. 2002, 3, 4, 5 until 17. And then ano yung y-axis? Ice sheet mass in billions of metric tons. Okay, we're done with step 2. Now what is the shape? It's declining. It's declining, right? So pababa. It's declining pababa. So it means pababa yung ice sheet natin. Ito yung example niya. Here's a graph of the loss of mass of Greenland ice sheet over time. And along the x-axis is time in years from 2002. So ganon yung dinescribe niya. And you can actually do this exercise in our graphs as well. Kita mo yung shape. Remember when I illustrated the shape of Vietnam's spending on education, which is, it slopes upwards earlier and downwards toward the tertiary. Baliktad sa atin. Mababa sa start and mataas sa end. So kita mo na yung shape eh. Kita mo na yung shape from there. So that's a good exercise actually. And maganda yung pangalan ng article na to. The title of the article, Google it, Every Graph Tells a Story. Okay? This is actually another example. World population growth. What is the x-axis? It's billions of people in... billions of people, actually. Yun. And what is this axis, the y-axis? That's time. And anong ibig sabihin ng shape na yan? Who can tell me? Biglang tumaas. Biglang taas yung population ng developing regions in particular nung 2000, starting actually nung 1950. Biglang taas siya. Pero iba yung shape pagdating sa industrialized regions. Mas mababa. So there was an explosion. That graph tells me that there was an explosion, first of all, in the overall population ng mundo since the 1950s. But also, it also tells me another story that biglang bumulusok yung population ng developing regions as compared to industrialized regions. So this graph is actually is a very rich graph. Pangalan nung nagturo sa atin noon actually, nung method of analyzing graphs like those is Sophia Hayes. And what she said is very crucial to us now. Facts and figures are great, but people will care about something more if they connect it to an emotional level. For example, feeling frustration about a lack of helium for an important kids' party, or worrying about climate change. Finding common ground with their audience requires back and forth communication, empathy, and careful thought. Key term, empathy. And this is something I share, this is an idea I share with Ingrid. You need to empathize with whoever will be reading your paper and whoever will be reading your communications piece. Know what your audience needs to hear. So hindi lang naman kami puro graph. Sorry, pag tinignan nyo naman yung EDCOM page, hindi naman puro graph yun. We also post stories of people, stories of teachers, stories of what we're doing, stories of our activities itself. So for example, ito, may picture ng mga nasa kuna. This is all last week, I think. It's about this is all from a hearing about disaster preparedness in our schools. The first post is a picture supplied by our partner or an organization that we consulted that showed yung mga nasirang schools sa Bicol nung mga nakaraang mga bagyo. Very heart-wrenching, right? May video pa yan actually. And then yung isang picture naman is a series of photos that shows how we're talking about it. Para at least yung stakeholders natin alam na something is being done about it and that we're listening. This one is another example. We announced a new publication. Ganyan kami mag-announce ng publication for 4 cards and then just a summary of the publication. Are K-12 students in the Philippines overworked by design? Yun yung caption namin. And that is actually the title of the paper itself. Ito actually is for the general public and for researchers. It directs them to download. Pero after this, a few days after this, we post follow-up posts about that particular research as well. Kumpara sa ating ASEAN neighbors, ang mga estudyante sa Pinas ay mas madaming instructional time per week. Mahigit 5 hours per week ng math, language, at science. Nagtagalog na kami after that. Kasi hindi na to para sa researchers lang, para sa general public. Tapos, after that, we lifted a quote from the research itself that said, "My son is in grade 1, 5 years old, 7 hours in school the whole day, exclusive of travel time. Imagine my son carries 3 bags daily." Yan yung babasahin ng isang parent. Yan yung babasahin and magre-resonate sa isang estudyante o sa isang teacher. Right? Hindi ito. Ito magre-resonate sa inyo, I think, sa mga researchers. Pero ito magre-resonate sa general public. Another quote from Gian Garbarino, Director of Science Outreach at Rockefeller University. "I often see communicators making the quite arrogant assumption that an audience wants to hear about or even cares about their message. I also see scientific messages framed in ways that are inaccessible to some audiences, either because they are presented at technical levels or because they don't frame the issue at hand in a way that is relevant to the lives of the intended audience." So we go back to why you're doing your research. Your research also needs to be relevant to your intended audience. And how you communicate your research after you have published it, you got to make sure that it is also relevant to your intended audience. Another tip, speak with your audience.
Bakit hindi nag-uusap ang DepEd, CHED at TESDA sa isa't isa tungkol sa mga systemic problems ng education? Ang sagot? It's complicated. Ayon sa focus group discussion na kinokondak kasama ang 3 committees dito sa EDCOM, 68 na interagency bodies ang ina-attendan ng 3. Isipan mo ng ganito, 68 na meetups na pwedeng kasama si DepEd, CHED at TESDA. Ang realidad ay hindi sila palagi magkakasama ng 3 sa mga meetup na to. Sa mga 68 na to, 24 lang ang pinupuntahan ni CHED at 26 lang ang pinupuntahan ni TESDA. At sa mga meetup na to, minsan wala din si DepEd at minsan si CHED o si TESDA lang ang
Okay. That is just a small snippet of the things that we actually release on TikTok. And that is actually number 1, yung pinaka nagre-resonate sa TikTok na video namin. Because it speaks the language. Number 1, Tagalog. And very short form lang, 90 seconds lang yon. Pero, may kakalabas lang rin na policy note sa website namin. The impact of trifocalization, Philippine education outcomes, and the coordination issue. They tell of the same story. Parang tangential sila both eh. They speak of trifocalization, they speak of coordination, but they are for different audiences. Right? Ito yung isa for the general public, yung isa for researchers. In the following days, we will actually summarize the key findings of this particular paper and then release it out to the general public as well. So there, you gotta speak the language. You gotta speak the language pagdating din sa mga captions nyo. Kaya kami nagtatagalog sa aming mga posts. Next. Okay. Doesn't work. Okay, there. And when you speak the language pagdating sa social media, you will find that it resonates more with your audience. So for example, actually maganda yung caption niya eh. Huwag makontento sa can read and can write lang. Kasi binago ng FLEMS yung definition pagdating sa literacy. Ang ganda ng caption niya, ni-share to ng isa naming followers sa Facebook. Huwag makontento sa can read and can write lang. That speaks a lot about how they understand, because they did understand. It shows that they did understand that particular graph or that particular diagram. Speak with your audience, not just to. Digital technologies have drastically changed science communication. You don't merely consume, the public doesn't merely consume, but they generate their own content. So ito just a few screenshots of our interactions with our followers on Facebook. Madami actually rich content na makukuha from Facebook comments. Especially kapag teachers yung mga nagko-comment, because they know it on the ground eh. Their experience. We can also do particularly surveys, of course. Katulad nito, tinulungan namin ang Teacher Education Council sa pag-conduct ng survey. Don't be afraid to poke fun at your findings. You'd be surprised at how humor goes a long way in social media. Makikita nyo sa Facebook at Instagram, may mga memes kami. And we poke fun at our findings as well. We're not shy at poking fun at our findings and using memes. Ito particularly, balik tayo dun sa FLEMS literacy rate kasi nung in-adjust ng FLEMS, nung in-adjust yung literacy rate, yung definition, from 91.6% na literacy rate, naging 77.7% na lang. Humor is a really important tool. And lastly, learn. Leverage digital platforms' capacity to measure data, then analyze. Ang maganda sa Facebook and sa other digital tools, you can measure data. Facebook and then Google Analytics pa lang yan. Pagdating sa TikTok, madami pang digital analytics tools. And one closing thing, be open to new opportunities. The internet is constantly evolving, especially kapag may mga bagong platforms. So for example, Blue Sky, which sabi nila ay kapalit ng Twitter. So, balik tayo sa agenda. Why communicate research and how do we maximize the digital space? This is just a summary of what we've discussed of how to maximize the digital space. Go where your audience is, take compelling stories, think differently, empathize, speak with your audience, and most importantly, learn. That's it for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sir Luigi, for that comprehensive presentation. For our audience, if you have questions, the next part of the this part of the program is the best time to do it. We highly encourage everyone's participation as we discuss today's topic further. Just a reminder for our on-site participants with questions in mind, kindly raise your hand and approach the microphones with our PIDS personnel, and the moderator will attend you in a short while. Meanwhile, our Facebook participants, you may use the comment section for your questions, and please do not forget to mention your name and your affiliation. Before we proceed with the program's open forum and discussion, I would like to introduce our moderator for this morning. Aside from being a senior research fellow at the PIDS, he is the officer in charge of the Research Information Department and the current project manager of Socioeconomic Research Portal for the Philippines, or SERPI. May I invite on stage, and let's give a warm round of applause to Dr. Sonny Domingo. Okay, Sir Sonny. May I invite our presenters to please come here on stage so we can start our open forum.
Thank you, Seti. May I request Luigi, Gabby, Ingrid to please join me here. Take your seat. Take the hot seats. So I guess it's turning out to be a really interesting and substantial day for all of us. And having these very competent resource speakers with us today, presenting their own experiences and knowledge, is a big thing. Is that big ingredient that makes this day, I think, worthwhile for all of us. Another, I think, very interesting landscape in terms of today's participation is the presence of our partners, SERPI partners, with you guys here. This is, I think, really not just a one-way delivery of information or knowledge or experiences. It's going to be us looking at several directions of knowledge, experience, inputs. No? So from our research, resource speakers, to you guys, our participants, our partners in the SERPI network. Okay, so one thing is clear, I think. We want our message delivery impactful in so many ways. Luigi mentioned earlier, we want to see the manifestation of that social impact, that positive social impact. Unfortunately, we are seeing not only positive impacts of our message delivery through the multitude of media channels, may those be traditional or social. We are also seeing a lot of negative social impacts. And I think the presentation earlier by Ingrid, us amplifying message delivery through scientific communication would play a lot in terms of us limiting that supposed negative manifestation of social impacts. So let's start our Q&A, our question and answer. You guys can manifest your questions, but please state your name and affiliation. So our ID people will assist.
Good morning. I'll just sit.
Yes, please.
I'm Nevel Bangsal from the Congressional Policy and Budget Research Department sa House of Representatives. I just would like to direct this question to Luigi. EDCOM 2 kasi has a limited shelf life. It has 3 years to fulfill or meet its mandates. And of course, education is such a very broad policy sector. And EDCOM 2 has limited resources to cover as much research as possible. And I do understand kasi you've been having partnerships with several institutions, I think even Congress at one point na ano. Because again, of course, resources is very important, especially when you do research. So my question is, given yung limited shelf life nung EDCOM 2, and the fact that I'm sure EDCOM 2 is also having its own database on basic, higher ed, etc. So, parang thinking like a disruptor, ano, is it possible for EDCOM to make this database open, accessible, especially kami kasi dito sa SERPI are all research institutions, di ba? One of the basic problem that we're encountering in our research is data availability. And kanina when you were presenting about data on flames, etc., but if you look at disaggregated data, I'm sure you will not be able to get that kind of information. Even a time series data on education indicators, education performance, even education budget. That's a very costly, that would be a very costly endeavor for any of the research institution. And of course, limited din naman din yung mga resources ng mga research institutions. And of course, EDCOM cannot be able to partner with so much research institutions. So, parang thinking like a disruptor, di ba? So that we will be able to produce as much information, as much research as possible. Diba? Why don't we parang make the data available, open to the public? I mean, I'm sure in the US, may mga ganun sila na ano eh. They have this information available online. And I think these are all public information naman eh. Diba? So, I think siguro with a certain modicum of data privacy, etc. But I think this information can provide so much information for all research institutions here in SERPI, and they can do kasi like for example, I'm sure lahat naman tayo has their own research agenda. PIDS has research agenda, we have our own research agenda, university-based research institutions have their own research agenda. So why don't you just let the data available, have them access that information, and make the research papers, outputs available to the public, then, alam mo yun, and I'm sure lahat naman to will go through as a process of review process, and I think policymakers like the Senate and the House would be able to make more evidence-based information given this research output. So yun lang yung ano ko kasi I'm sure you can only, EDCOM 2 can only do so much given the limited time and resources you have. So, and the fact that yung problem natin on education is so much, I mean, for so long, di ba, yung ating performance indicators relative to other countries, talagang we are lagging behind. And I don't know if we'll be able to make progress with so limited time and resources. So yun lang yung parang inaano ko, kasi what if wala na yung EDCOM 2? So what happens? What happens to the information that you have? So in the same manner na yung lessons natin in EDCOM 1, diba? So yun lang, parang thinking like a disruptor in this case. Would that be a possible scenario in the immediate future?
Thank you, Novel. Before Luigi answers, may I request for 2 more questions from our audience? Yes, ma'am, please. Monty. Okay.
Especially in the higher educational institutions in our country.
Okay, one last question before we allow Luigi and the others to respond. Yes, please.
Hi, good morning. Maiya po from Agricultural Credit Policy Council. And I have a question. Siguro for everyone from the panel po can have their take on this. Yung tungkol po dun sa disinformation, like how do you think we could best combat kapag nag-viral ang isang disinformation or parang naglabas ka ng certain material and then na-misinterpret and lumaki na po yung issue. Like how would you go about combating that disinformation? Yun po. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So, we can start with Luigi. Luigi has a couple of questions related to EDCOM. Number one would be us having access to your archive of data. And then, the number one learning from EDCOM's multiple researches. And then for everyone, later on, that question about us combating misinformation. Luigi, please.
Okay, Sir Noel from CPBRD. I think we've worked with you before and we've asked your help before, kaya I owe it to you as well to answer your question. Your first actually question is, what happens to data and if it's to the EDCOM2 data na na-collect namin after our, as you put it, limited shelf life. Masakit. Masakit pakinggan yung limited shelf life. Pero, it is possible, of course. Ang magandang technique na nakitang ginawa ko, na ginawa ng EDCOM na nakita ko is we partnered with a lot of organizations, whether they're government organizations, like, of course, DepEd, CHED, TESTA. We've partnered with them through data sharing agreements. We partnered with them through research. And we share data regularly. But also, this is born about, yung partnerships na mga yun, born about dahil we share your concern din and we share your challenge na mahirap talagang kumalap ng data in yung data ecosystem ng government. Mahirap. Mahirap kumalap ng valid and ng clean na data. And that is actually one of our primary challenges rin. We share that. I think yung proposal nyo to make data more open is something na pinag-iisipan din ng EDCOM kasi yun nga ang tawag sa kanya is data governance. Pagdating sa, for example, NAT scores, National Achievement Test scores pa lang, ang hirap i-consolidate and ang hirap makahanap ng clean data about it. That's something that we actually are looking into as well. Whether we legislate it or like i-convince ang DepEd to put forth a memo about it is another matter. Kasi madaming policy avenues to effectuate that particular solution. Hindi lang batas. Pwedeng partnership. Pwedeng a coalition. Pwedeng a memorandum order, a directive. So we need to be creative about it. And we need to acknowledge first sa executive department and sa legislative department that this is a problem, especially for researchers and for policymakers. Second one, the second question. Most significant insight, I think, for HEIs in particular, right, ma'am? I think yung pinaka-significant for me is make your data useful to your audience. Useful, that's the operative word, useful. Kasi before you know what is useful to your audience, first you need to know how to empathize. You need to empathize with your audience and to put yourself in their shoes, whether your audience is a policymaker, a parent, a student, or a stakeholder in your particular field. I think yun.
Thank you, Luigi. I have actually an added response to Noel's question earlier because we just had our research planning, the first phase of our research planning at PIDS, and we invited some of your key people within the department. And it was manifested that right now, the landscape is more open. So we can go to DepEd, bring our external drives, and we can probably get the data that we require. So that's, I think, a very positive development. And hopefully, it materializes. So Gabby, please, to answer that concern about misinformation. You can ask them.
Okay. So, Maia, no? Your context was about, kunwari kung na-misinterpret yung content. Okay, yung content, no? Actually, kasi my beat in Rappler is disinformation. So, I have a good understanding of like how social media works, how things spread. Siguro if it's just, I mean, an honest mistake lang, no? Kung misinterpretation lang. It doesn't hurt naman to release a statement to clarify na actually this is what the data says. This is how we interpreted it. Yun, you can be polite about it naman. Yes, sorry.
Just to clarify po, kumare po yung material that you send out and then the audience like has a different spin on it or like focuses on one thing and it's a misreading or misinterpretation of that data. Yun lang po. So yung audience po sana.
So bale your audience, no?
Yeah, or they
okay.
latch on to like the wrong, not wrong, but a different take than what you intended.
Well, I think it's fine naman kasi we're always all learning naman about like how to resonate with our audiences naman. I think it's natural then for anyone na managing social media no, to make, you know, like missteps lang, like here and there to not understand, parang to make those little mistakes then and how to reach your audiences naman. I think it's okay lang naman din na when you encounter those experiences, it's normal na, okay, this is how our audience makes sense of like yung mga gantong pieces of information, content. And then we take that as like a learning experience. Siguro you realize like, okay, na misinterpret yung infographic kasi parang ganito yung phrasing ng headline or like ganito yung pag-layout ng graphic so maybe we can improve moving forward na so that, you know, para yung mga content natin in the future, it doesn't get as easily misinterpreted. I think it's really good also for organizations din talaga to understand how their audiences engage with your content. Kasi, ayun na nga, parang you have to make sure talaga that you get the right pieces of information out there na parang yung bottom line talaga, yun talaga dapat yung takeaway ng audience. It's just a learning experience naman talaga and I think that it happens naman for everyone who manages social media na to, you know, have difficulties trying to resonate with like the audiences that you're trying to speak to. So I think it's a constant effort talaga of making sure you meet your audiences halfway. Did I answer your question? Okay.
Thank you, Gabby. Ingrid, please.
Thank you. Okay. Just to add, syempre, Rappler, ikaw na yung more expert on this info. But I guess like on the researcher side, what I've seen is that minsan hindi malinaw yung strategy natin sa pag-share ng information. Sometimes we think of, okay, ito yung big groups of audiences, policy brief, report, art card. But I think we can be even more strategic, like what platforms, and especially what key messages you want to put out. And I think if you are more clear in your team kung ano yung key message, mas madaling mag-align. And don't be afraid to test that with like your friends or kung sino man. Kasi I think some studies have showed na, diba, it's really sometimes also about inoculating against, like, even before siya mas interpret, parang just check na you've also done all that you could have done before it gets out there. So, yeah, just on the other side. But it sounds like you have a clear strategy naman from the thought you've put into this.
Thank you, Ingrid. I guess it's also important that we make that distinction. No? In this case, she was referring to non-intentional miscommunication and eventually misinterpretation by our supposed stakeholders or receivers of information. The more complex matter would be intentional delivery of false materials or false messages. Probably just to add to your responses, can you have some say as to how do we troubleshoot or address miscommunication in mass media or social media?
So, intentional spread ng disinformation.
Intentional.
Okay.
What we've seen so much during the past
Yes.
few years.
Okay, I think it was emphasized naman, like in all of our presentations naman, that you have to speak their language. You really have to meet them halfway naman talaga in order to penetrate those online circles. Sorry, I'm going to put my disinformation journalist hat on. No? Parang I've studied like social media platforms for a long time, and alam naman natin na for social media, the algorithms can be very insulating. So, when in our research for this information, wala kasi akong visual, but we do have like this graph that we use at Rappler na we mapped out yung networks sharing false claims about this certain narrative in the election, and then versus a network sharing like fact checks about that narrative. And when we mapped out the networks, sobrang separated yung networks. And our takeaway was that they have their own world yung mga nag-share ng false information. So fact checks kasi we learned in itself na parang if you stick to a certain kind of format, siguro a certain formula for spreading truthful information, they won't always necessarily penetrate the audiences that you want to reach. When we studied kasi like yung kunwari pag fact checks kasi very journalistic, very academic, whereas like yung mga content that spreads through disinformation bubbles, no, it's very emotionally charged. Like you have to, like I guess this is what Yuju's talking about when you have to empathize with your audience. So parang that kind of content, they get to empathize with their audience. Kaya sobrang benta yung mga ganong content for disinformation circles. So sa amin sa Rappler and other fact-check organizations, researchers, it's been a constant effort for us to find ways to meet people where they are, to be able to speak their language, para we get to penetrate those social media circles talaga. So for instance, syempre sobrang uso na yung TikTok ngayon, 'di ba? We can't afford not to be on TikTok kasi diyan talaga yung audiences natin. So we really have to find a way to convert our our facts into entertaining vertical videos, short form content, so that those kinds of audiences talaga, like we get to widen our reach as journalists, as research organizations. That's my take on the spread of intentional disinformation.
Thank you, Gabby. Well, related to that, actually, is a question from our Zoom participant, Ms. Noreen Ethel of UPLB. Her question is, don't you think disseminating research in an entertaining manner, or as you mentioned earlier, speaking their language probably, might reduce its credibility? Ingrid, probably, given your earlier manifestation about scientific delivery of messages, please.
This is such an interesting question, and I think I kind of want to pose it to everyone. Like, I want to ask, what gives something credibility for you? I think they're not 1:1. I think something can be creative and credible and true. They're not opposites because they're not like in the same lane. I understand where she's coming from. I think it's that the language of science that we're used to, is gives it credibility. Thank you. But I think there has to be that balance of what's the point of that language if no one understands it. I think we should consider them as ingredients na we measure out. Like, I really like yung example ni Gabby where she talked about, kunwari, was it like gender disinformation while doing a Get Ready With Me? I think if I follow Rappler already, I already have in my mind, I trust this news organization. So what they put out already lends it credibility, and it's that continued work that continues to give it credibility. For me, I think our asker can ask for their audience what gives them credibility. There's a reason why researchers still use journals. For them, that's credible. But for our audience, obviously, for instance, people who follow YouTubers or who maybe prefer alternative forms of knowledge, for them, that's credible. So I think we can just consider them as different ingredients in forming our message. And balancing being heard and being believed. I hope that makes sense.
I'm just going back to your earlier slides. No, you said that scientists right now are also in the fray. So they have to be involved, not only in terms of generating research outputs, but also probably in terms of delivery, right? And Luigi and Gabby, I think, seconded by saying that the science process really doesn't stop with research. It goes beyond actual delivery of that message, okay? And then I think you've also mentioned activating both emotional and cognitive areas. So I guess that's the grayish part. If you are more creative, probably you want to go for that emotional area within our supposed recipients of information, right? But that probably translates to also us being less effective in terms of delivering actual concrete data or evidence. Is that a reality in terms of our educational research communication, Luigi? Communicating research, hard facts, hard evidence within our research, educational research community and our stakeholders. So is that an issue for EDCOM right now?
Actually, no eh. Kasi when we communicate yung graphs, yung hard facts, that's when people believe. That's when people take notice because they know we have access to the information. We know they know we have access to the data. That's why that's what makes people believe us. That's what doon nag-testem yung credibility namin. And we have a team that crunches that data and analyzes that data. Pero hindi siya mutually exclusive with the emotional side of things, because a research paper can have hard facts, but it also can have stories of people in them, stories of teachers struggling with 50 administrative tasks, stories of students struggling 50 hours per week sa classroom and sa homework. Those stories resonate, and those stories are still, you can still find them in peer-reviewed journals and studies that can come out of SERPI, PIDS, EDCOM. Yun, I think they're not mutually exclusive.
All right, thank you, Luigi. Probably it's a lot easier to deliver positive messages, right? As compared to delivering something less optimal, education result-wise, right? Yeah. So, okay, I'm opening the floor again for comments. Yes, please.
Comments or questions?
Questions, comments, questions, whatever you want to manifest. Thank you.
Malamig dito sa side namin dahil nakatapat kami sa aircon. I'm Julius Relampagos from the Department of Economics, University of San Carlos. So my question relates to the use of AI in research, in generating research. A lot of young people now go to ChatGPT and they could actually generate reports, research provided by ChatGPT. So while we do recognize that we need to embrace AI, like we don't ban it, but we need to somehow find a balance in embracing AI to promote knowledge, to to improve knowledge, but there are also dangers when AI is not being responsibly used. So, for example, sa USC, we just came up with a policy guidelines on the responsible use of AI. So my question to all the panelists is, what are your thoughts about the policy environment on promoting the responsible use of AI? And is this something that the government of the Philippines needs to look into, so that the information that are being put out there, especially in social media, there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation in social media, while at the same time, social media can be a platform to disseminate. So, yun na ang tanong ko sa mga panelists. What are your thoughts about having the policy direction on the use of AI in research?
Thank you, Julius. Before I ask you to respond, is there anyone from the group who wants to ask an AI-related question? Meron po? Novel, please.
Yung sa akin naman on the other side of AI, kasi right now that's one direction that we would, especially for research institutions, kasi very positive din naman yung use of AI. Like for example, when you're dealing with big data, di ba? So like in our case, what we want to do is parang we want to convert, like for example lang, DBM data, budget data. Kasi yung budget data, very voluminous documents yun eh. Of course, if you do research manually looking at those data, I doubt you can go so much or do so much. So we try to use AI, convert the data into machine-readable information. Then, meron ka dapat isang AI software that or machine learning software that can do all this processing on the data that you have and generate graphics, infographics, or parang dashboard type of presentation of information. I think DBM has already started doing this. If you would see doon sa kanilang homepage, may dashboard sila sa homepage nila, and you be able to generate information, infographics using their data. But of course, limited pa rin yung kanilang limited pa rin yung capability ng kanilang dashboard. But I think looking forward, especially when you deal or use big information, I'm sure especially in education. So, but of course may cost eh. There's a cost to doing or using AI platforms. In fact, ASTI is developing a lot of AI-enabled programs, but kailangan may cost pa rin eh, because you partner with them through an MOU, but there's always a cost in that. So my question to the three panels is, ano yung nakikita niyong future, especially for research institutions like us, using AI-enabled platforms, and if there's any sort of parang minimizing the cost, so that, but it does help. It does help in our research, especially when dealing with big information.
Well, thank you, Nobel. So that's CPBRD manifesting a successful application of AI. You guys can start with your answers.
Okay. Dalawa yung kausap ko. One is a professor/administrator. Yun yung hat niya na wine-wear. Kasi he's asking about, hi sir, USC. He's asking about the responsible use of AI in higher education institutions. My response to that is, the trend lagi, pagdating sa, this is calling from my experience as startups rin, sir. The trend lagi with the law and innovation is that the law is always late. The law comes after the innovation. The law comes after the disruption, and AI today is a disruption. It's always late. For example, data privacy laws. Nagkapalit-palit na tayo ng data way before nagkaroon ng data privacy officer sa mga organizations ninyo, right? It will always be late, and that is the nature of the law. It cannot predict an innovation, and it cannot predict a disruption. Otherwise, hindi na siya innovation. Hindi na siya disruption. But then, the tendency is always that the law always catches up. There will be, I think, on my personal experience, there will always be a law that will regulate AI. And hindi lang tayo yung may problema niyan, sir. Kahit sa ibang bansa, namamroblema sila sa mga AI and sa mga students using AI in the classroom. But it will take some time before ma-polish yung regulatory landscape because hindi pa nga natin maintindihan kung ano ang AI, the nature of it, and how it will be used and how it will evolve in the next few years.
All right.
The second question is yung kay Sir Novel regarding, it's another machine learning naman, which is another form of using AI, which I think is very, very novel. Turuan nyo kami, sir. Kasi hanggang mga Python pa lang kami. Pero machine learning is basically telling the computer to learn the trend or the patterns of a particular big data set and apply it to a larger, more expansive data set, which is a positive use of AI, as Sir Sunny said. And it's a good use case as long as it's reined in. Tama.
Thank you, Luigi. So I guess policy right now in terms of AI is late. The challenge is for us to be more proactive, no? in looking at potential disruptions, not only AI. Okay, please, Gabby.
Siguro I'll answer both questions no in one go. Ako kasi I also use AI sometimes in my work. Kami sa The Nerve, our Rappler's data partner. Syempre, we also deal with large data sets. So, may tools din kami to make sense out of yung mga ganong large volumes of data. I think what's important lang talaga is when you use AI, kailangan talaga may layer ng human review. So, for instance, kasi kami sa The Nerve, our motto is we mix human and machine. So we let the machines do a lot of the work for us also, but we also make sure na para may element of human review. We double check kung tama yung analysis nila, yung tama ginawa nila. Even something as, siguro just to share an innocuous example, no? Kami may Secret Santa kami sa work. And then parang yung theme is, so sa mga nabunot mo, you have to get them a gift based sa birth year nila, parang ganon. So I asked ChatGPT, ano ba yung mga naging uso during this year? And then they gave me a list of movies, books, ganon. Tapos parang nung ginugol ko naman, it was from a totally different year. So I think something that needs to be understood also about these ChatGPT, these AI models, is that they're also operating on a lot of data that's not reliable. You also have to look at the source data talaga eh. Kasi syempre yung basis kasi ng mga ChatGPT, they're using different kinds of data that might not necessarily be verified. So it's always important na, okay, minsan kasi I use ChatGPT pag na writer's block ako or something. But I also have to do my own manual research and fact-checking and verification. Siguro another aspect also of responsible use of AI would be, there are lots of fears about AI replacing human workers or a lot of fears about AI exploiting human labor. So for instance, syempre, kunwari, there are lots of news articles about companies na they discovered, kaya naman pala yun ng AI. So then they lay off huge teams at their company. Or there have been news stories na in the United States, parang may AI-powered drive-through yung restaurant. And then they found out that it's actually being run by remote workers from the Philippines. kasi cheaper yung labor natin here. So there's a lot of gray areas that, I mean, not gray areas, I mean like parang a lot of discussion that has to be had about like yun nga parang how ethical it is to use AI in terms of labor issues. And there's so much kasi that AI can do, but there's a lot that AI cannot do also. Eh. So you really have to make sure to do your own work also alongside that.
Thank you, Gabby. Ingrid, the question came from
Yes.
somebody from the academe. You are from the academe, so probably you can
Yeah.
aptly answer that. Okay. Please,
I think
Ingrid.
interesting. I think it depends lagi, no? But basically, with regard to policy and on AI in the Philippines, ang hirap nga kasi we're playing catch up, di ba? Pero siguro at the basic level, we hope, what I want to see sa policy is a vision of what we want to do with AI and protections for people who might get the back end of it. So that means, ayun, like protecting people's works. Like there's so, and especially in education, I think, protecting people's works, creative people, people whose jobs might be replaced, and that's not always wise, but employers don't know that. But also, especially in education, I think it's a responsibility to understand where it really fits so that the young people, know what to do with it. Ayun, just like have that vision and like an idea of what we want to do with this and protect those who might be vulnerable for it. I think that's what I'd like to see with regard to policy. And with regard to using AI-powered platforms in research, sorry, I wanted to clarify. You mentioned like the costs related to this. Could you repeat that? What were the costs, for instance, you were saying?
Well, basically, like for example, where do you store data? If you store data in the iCloud, then of course you will need subscription. If you intend to do it to build your own data asset management systems, then it will cost the department to procure these facilities. So, in fact, doon pa lang sa data storage is already something that will cost the department. Wala pa tayo doon sa AI software or machine learning that will all do this crunching of big information. So, yun, those are the costs that initially I have in mind.
Okay, thank you. That gives me a better idea. I think it's similar with a lot of parang kahit yung mga parang dati 'di ba yung primary data collection, padala ka ng magi-interview, lodging, communication, food. I feel like it's maybe we can use experiences from trying to balance out the benefit we get from that kind of resource investment. Similarly, but we're not investing in this case for flights and people. We're investing in data storage. If we can get high yield investment ROI on that in terms of knowledge, then we can look at it, manage those risks in that way, perhaps. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Ingrid. Okay, for the next set of questions, I go to Facebook. One of our participants from Facebook. He's asking about the institutional dimension to research communication, particularly the roles of our bureaucratic institutions. You are with DepEd, with CHED, but you have DepEd, you have CHED, you have our other partners within the academe, the landscape of our academic institutions. You have our representation from Ateneo, and you have, of course, our traditional media representative. Not really that traditional because Raptor is quite progressive, right? So, given that institutional dimension, how do we go about better communicating and better addressing miscommunication? Who wants to? So this is the institutional dimension. EDCOM really is an institutional response, right? For us to get more information, be more knowledgeable about the educational landscape in the country, and eventually manifest answers through policy and possibly action. So please, who wants to start? Luigi, please start.
Tama kayo, Sir Sunny, na we live in a bureaucracy, and the EDCOM, it's very bureaucratic talaga, especially when you work in government. We all know this, in any organization. But I think the crucial thing that helps is formulating a concrete, actionable strategy even before you execute your communications. Bago ka mag-post, in short, bago ka mag-post sa Facebook, dapat it stems from a strategy. And that strategy comes from a messaging strategy that is agreed upon by, for example, your boss or by your stakeholders up above. Yun yung strategy. Kailangan pulido muna yon bago ka mag-execute sa Facebook or sa Instagram or whatever social media platform. And yun, hindi siya biglaan eh. Executing a digital campaign is not taken lightly. It's planned way beforehand, and you execute it 10% of the way. 90% of the way is planning and strategizing, and executing it is 10%. So I think that's a solution to the bureaucratic
A very
question.
rational way to go forward. Start with that strategy, communication strategy. Gabby, please. Ingrid. Okay.
Sige. From my perspective, I guess, from like research institutions and academe, really for me, it's invest in a team, invest in people to do this, because, I think we've mentioned that it's part of the scientific process. I think, not just like from unis na teaching, but really universities, I think could stand, and research institutions, could really stand to broaden their goals. It's not just about talking to each other, but talking to more people. And it takes effort. It takes a lot of time and effort to do these things. And if your expertise is doing research, and if you don't want to talk to people, that's fine. Find people who will. I think it's really an investment. I can count on my hand the number of universities na nakahanap akong may communications officer, much less a team. And you expect those people to cover events, to manage social media, to make a strategy to even make this happen. Check the messaging, right? Make it entertaining as well as accurate. That's a lot to ask. I think it's fair game today to consider that communication's not just an add-on. It's really part of the process, and it's important, and it's something worth investing in. And I was so happy kanina that we were introduced to the social media manager of PIDS. I was like, that's great. Not every research institute I've spoken to has a social media manager. And I think that's a great step in the right direction.
Thank you, Ingrid. Actually, related to that, Luigi mentioned earlier about TikTok and how it caters to probably mostly the young, the more progressive group. And just recently, we have been doing these exchanges about PIDS having a TikTok account. So probably we'll get there soon enough. I'll taper the question for Gabby, because earlier she manifested that there has to be that human review dimension to AI, for example, right? In this case, are we open to a more progressive institutional review with the ICT, possibly NTC, or other bureaucratic institutions taking that more active role in terms of probably in one way censoring, probably in one way quality assuring that what we are putting out there is really true, no? or beyond falsehood in many cases. So Gabby, please.
Okay, so siguro I just wanna say then that syempre no one institution, no one industry has a monopoly na over information dissemination, especially in the age of technology nga with all these AI technologies and social media, digital platforms. Sa amin, Rappler is part of this, if you're familiar, we're part of this coalition called Facts First PH. It's a concrete example of how it will really take all of us to ensure a healthier information landscape. So we have several layers. Just to explain siguro, no? We have several layers. So we have like yung mga fact checkers and journalists who can debunk yung mga false claims. We also partner with educational influencers, content creators who can make those claims, who can make those fact checks more accessible to syempre yung mga nasa TikTok, social media platforms. We also partner with academe who can do more in-depth research, and then we partner with legal institutions also na if ever may ma-escalate na like a serious case of like let's say online harassment against a certain person or institution, and we have like legal partners who can help us with that. And I've seen also na syempre I guess for a healthier ecosystem, we also are really focused on holding, like, let's say, social media platforms accountable, also government agencies accountable. So for instance, means that I had one of my coverages from last year was this community journalist. He was red tagged repeatedly online. And it was, syempre, it caused a lot of distress, and it is harassment. So it was in an unprecedented move. What he did was he actually complained to Meta. He filed a complaint at the NPC to disclose information about like yung red taggers. Just to make sure that we get to hold these harassers accountable. No? So I really think it would take like a multi-stakeholder approach. To tell truthful. To relay truthful information, accurate information, and also to hold those accountable now who spread like, intentional disinformation and, harass people in, syempre in the pursuit of reliable communication and truthful information dissemination. I hope I answered your question, sir. Let me know if like may follow-up questions po kayo.
Thank you, Gabby. Well, we have less than 10 minutes left for this open forum. But I guess if you're going to cap the exchanges, it's really us looking at a more diverse, more complex landscape in terms of information dissemination. May it be through our academic channels or through our media channels, traditional and social media. Now, I think the challenge is how to thrive in this complexity, right? Thrive, meaning our supposed recipients of our stories are able to internalize and positively process what we are conveying to them. But in that process, maintain integrity. Not only the integrity of the story, but also integrity of the storyteller, right? So I guess for your final manifestations, may I ask you guys, how do we go forward? Make everything better in this very complex landscape. Let's start with Luigi, please.
Ako, Sir Sunny, babalik ako doon sa... Okay. With all of the discussion about AI, machine learning, technology, social media, gusto ko lang bumalik lagi sa pag-empathize with a person. You are talking not to a machine, you are talking not to an artificial intelligence, you are talking to another person. Always keep that in mind with your research and your science communication. When you do that, and when you put it at the heart of your strategy and of whatever campaign you implement in your respective fields, I think you will always go to being relatable, to being human, to being credible, but still authoritative. And you'll always be listened to.
Thank you, Luigi. Gabby, please.
Jumping off of what Luigi said, no, parang you have to make sure that you have to know your audience, and you have to make sure that you know how to speak their language, you know how to meet them halfway. Because feeling, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, your writing, your content, your research paper, your project is only as good as how understandable it is. Parang the value lies in how understandable and accessible it is. So you have to make sure na your content, the way that you communicate to others, it resonates with your audience, your ideal audience. And syempre, of course, given that we use technologies like AI responsibly and ethically, and syempre we're disseminating truthful and accurate information, yun, ultimately, like, I think it's very important talaga na you have to meet your audience halfway eh. Kasi, ayun nga, like, we can't expect our audience to meet us where we are, na we stand from our ivory towers, na sila na bahala to like try to understand us. Like, we should have the humility to step down and, be able to, understand where they're coming from, what kind of messages resonate with them, and how we can best, communicate and make meaningful discussion with them. Yeah.
Thank you, Gabby. Ingrid.
Thank you. So I basically echo what these two have said about empathy and about listening. Siguro just what I will add na lang is that in this complex, ever-changing landscape, it might help to remember to stay grounded. So we talk a lot about storytelling, messaging, strategy, disinformation. And it's hard. It takes a lot of effort and time to catch up and understand where we are in that, to speak and to listen. But when we feel a bit overwhelmed, we can also take our conversations one conversation at a time. Who am I listening to? What am I telling them? What are the stories we're talking about? And remembering that all of these stories are about people. Talk about data points, education, money. It's about people's lives. And I think that just helps ground where we are and helps us be better parts of the conversation and of the story.
Excellent, Ingrid, Gabby, Luigi. So we have exhausted our time for the open forum. But I guess all the questions and the manifested answers relate to SERPI, no? Our partnership. It's us coming together, delivering substantial evidence-based information in possibly the most accessible way. And SERPI right now is a platform that's very progressive. With your help, and I think later on we'll be delivering a bit of a status report as to how SERPI has been going through with its supposed progressive steps after last year's conference. So next year, we'll also have our annual report, but this afternoon we'll be delivering that bit of information about how we went forward and actually took your suggestions from last year. So again, thank you, Luigi. Thank you, Gabby. Thank you, Ingrid. Thank you guys for the questions and for listening. Our next part would be, I think, facilitated by Zeki. Zeki, please.
Thank you. Dr. Sonny and our presenters, may we request you to stand up to award a certificate of appreciation. Let's start with Mr. Luigi Conti. A certificate of appreciation for imparting his invaluable insights as a speaker during the SERPI Network Annual Symposium and Meeting on the theme Research in Action, Transforming Research Dissemination in the Digital Age, given this 5th day of December 2024 at Pasay City, Philippines, signed by Dr. Aniceto Ciorbeta Jr., President of PIDS. Okay, and for our next presenter is Ms. Gabby Baizas for imparting her invaluable knowledge. A round of applause for Ms. Gabby Baizas. A photo op, a short photo op, please. Okay, and lastly for Ms. Ingrid Espinosa, a certificate of appreciation and a photo op, please. Okay, and the three presenters, please, with Dr. Sonny, right in front. Okay. Okay. Once again, we appreciate your attendance today for this morning session. The speaker's presentation will be available at the PIDS website. Please help us improve our events by answering a short feedback form through the links provided. And keep in touch with us as well. You may follow SERPI and PIDS on Facebook for our online viewers, LinkedIn, Twitter or X, and YouTube channels for more updates. Also, feel free to visit our website for more information. We hope to have you, our online participants, again in our future events. Please visit the PIDS website to know the details of our upcoming events starting next year and register. Finally, we would like to thank our participants from the government and private sectors, academe, civil societies, and international development organizations present on site. And with that, thank you everyone and have a great day ahead. And for our on-site participants, see you later for our afternoon session. Thank you everyone. Bye online participants. And lastly, for our on-site participants, we would have a short photo op. May I request Mondi to assist our participants, please?